This story began in a terrifying place. A man waved his hand, took a deep breath, and admitted he had failed again. He said that if all went well, he would end up with a super-heavy sword as dense as a neutron star. Staring into the hot liquid, he suddenly wondered whether he would ever succeed with this magic and realized he could not fight against completely unequal odds this way. To push the thoughts away, the man closed his eyes and took another very deep breath. Raising his hand high, he summoned the magic of flight and launched into the air, thinking he should visit a crowded city for once, somewhere he had not been in a very long time. And at that moment, memories of 3 people came to mind. One of them admitted he wasn't familiar with the area. Another said he had an urgent matter and had to go, and the third said he couldn't die and had to leave for his family's sake in the village, believing a loner had limits and should find companions. In the blink of an eye, the space before him split open, and a large portal appeared very close, leaving him stunned. Surprise froze him, his mouth opening as he gasped, unable to move while he stared at the portal and wondered what it might be. A magic circle suddenly appeared beneath his feet and pulled him toward the strange object, and at first he thought it might be flight magic. But that idea faded quickly because he had no particular problems with that kind of magic. Getting closer to the object, the man wondered more about the source of the curvature of time and space. Panicked, he readied himself for battle, thinking if the distortion began pulling everything in, trouble was inevitable. At the same moment, a small hand appeared right in front of him, reaching for him. Confused, the man nearly stepped back, drawing his hands up toward his face and body. He asked in horror what it was all about. A girl's silhouette appeared from the curve, taking slow steps, and soon she stepped out of this object with a soft smile. Charmed, the man blushed but still felt afraid. So in a trembling voice he asked who the girl was, and the stranger smiled and gently said she was pleased to meet you and that her name was Reseha, the goddess of invocations. After the sweet girl introduced herself, silence fell, and the man said nothing while she simply stared and smiled. The man turned away, barely holding back his laughter, unable to believe the girl had just called herself a goddess because it sounded ridiculous, and he smiled calmly. Struggling to hold back a laugh, the man cleared his throat and asked the woman what she meant overall. The stranger apologized warmly and explained she was a goddess from another world, here to find a hero to summon. Smiling, she said she should be placed beside the strongest person in the world and asked whether he was the strongest. A shiver ran down the young man's spine as he wondered if the girl really wanted to tell children a fairy tale about a goddess choosing a hero to summon to another world. The man did not expect God to say they were not fairy tales, and he froze, stunned that his thoughts had been answered. He wondered if she had bypassed his anti-magic and read his mind. Then the man named Exile politely said he was the strongest man in the world and added that he was the strongest among people. He met the girl's gaze and asked if he could walk the path of heroism with her. Exile thought that with her support, he could deal with the perfect ones. Extremely pleased, the goddess asked whether he would really go with her, thanked him warmly as she noticed his violent reaction and Exile felt uneasy. He looked at her and asked what he needed to do next. Reseha said that under the king's orders, he must defeat the demon king. Exile agreed outwardly, but inwardly dismissed the girl's words as nonsense. Regia smiled and showed Exile the distortion she had come through. Regia asked if he was ready for their trip. The young man agreed without thinking, and Reseha immediately reached into the distortion as a loud crackle rolled across the square. Resel's body started to crumble and warp, and he tensed as it collapsed inward. The man believed that anyone who refused to take a risk would end up with nothing, so he decided to go. Exile chose to stop useless resistance, closed his eyes and let the current carry him. Exile felt a tingling and opened his eyes to find himself in an enormous room with Reisha and many others standing before him. Exile looked around in awe, wondering if she had stepped into another world. At that moment, Resia stood behind the man in fine clothes and shook her head. The man smiled and greeted Exile. Spreading his arms wide, the king told the man that he had summoned him to this place. Exile looked around, saw people beside him he did not recognize, and realized he was not the only one called there. Hearing the king ask another man if only 4 heroes had been summoned this time, Exile heard the man say it was exactly so and immediately realized something important. Seeing them, he noticed they had very little magical power for heroes, and he was genuinely amazed they were the strongest in their worlds. Razel wanted to check these people's status, but a smiling man from another world said he wanted to introduce new characters to this world first, and Razel quickly decided it was best to listen. The man said their world is home to three main races: humans, demi-humans, and demons. Demi-humans are few and pose almost no threat to the others. Listening to this, Razel realized that so far everything matched his home world, and the man grew very serious and said the whole problem was demons. He said humans and demons have been fighting constantly, and their strength has recently increased, and currently demons control humanity. That was why they called all these people a conscripted hero, a civil servant, a fraud, a summoned hero, an adventurer, a realist, another summoned hero, a mercenary, a banza, and the summoned hero, unknown Rizal. The man smiled, thinking that he had once hunted demons, sharpened his skills on them, and been thanked by countries around the world. Bowing low, the man asked the heroes to help destroy this evil race, and said they must defeat the demon lords so they could spend the rest of their lives free of worry. Fraud Grind said it sounded very tempting. Rio laughed and said it would be a good test of his strength. Banza vowed that as enemies of humanity, he would end them without question. Rizal stayed silent. A maid brought a cloth-covered object on a small tray. The man said they should first measure the current abilities of everyone, and then politely asked the heroes to place their hands on this crystal ball. They lifted the cloth and revealed the ball. The results of the test will be basic combat skills. The ball's formula cannot detect anything specific. Razel wondered whether they truly wanted to convert mana and magic power into numbers with a formula. The very smug Reel went first, laughed, and said he had been called there first, then touched the ball. A bright flash lit the air, and Riol was clearly confused as she asked what was happening. A man rushed to the balloon and said this couldn't be true. Rio looked confused and asked what was wrong. The man stood speechless, unable to explain what was wrong with the adventurer's fighting strength. With admiration, he announced that Riol's combat strength was 4,097 units, an impressive result. The rabbit was delighted, and the goddess gave a soft gasp. Rizel paused to consider whether that number was really so large. The adventurer was trailed by a clever con man who pushed up his glasses and said it was his turn next. He placed his hand and discovered his fighting strength was 3,664 units. The man said the civil servant is also very strong. Bonza, with a combat strength of 3,776 units, was quickly checked, and the man said they could all stand up for themselves. Smiling with genuine delight, the man said this was exactly what they could expect from the summoned heroes. He then told Razel the young man was next in line. Razel calmly agreed and stepped forward. He approached the ball, thinking he was more interested in whether the ball could calculate that specific thing, and the eyes of all the summoned heroes were fixed on him. Strangely, the ball didn't react. Razel quietly told the employee the balloon wasn't working. The man apologized awkwardly, laughed that something was wrong with the subject, and on closer inspection, looked very surprised. The man noticed the balloon was broken. Razel asked, puzzled, what was wrong. The employee laughed awkwardly, said everything was fine, and told Razel to try checking the combat strength again. When the guy put his hand on it, the man's face went noticeably pale, and speaking guiltily, he told the king that the guy's fighting strength was 0 units. Angry, the ruler asked whether he had heard correctly that the force was 0, and the employee replied guiltily that it was true and the crystal was not damaged. Razel raised his hand politely, wanting to say something about the device that deeply disturbed him. The king refused to listen and shouted for Razel to leave, saying he would not recognize someone with no magic as a hero and ordering Razel out of the castle immediately, leaving the man amazed. He asked the king to wait a moment because something had gone wrong with the 0 and he could use magic, then turned and wondered whether there was anything he could do about it as his gaze fell on the fire in the fireplace, and an idea came to him. Razel bent down quickly and stretched his hand out, telling the king to watch as he used atomic reconstruction, a technique that needs at least 7,000 combat forces and perfectly shows what Razel can do. The employee, confused and amazed, said the charcoal had really turned into a diamond, his hands shaking violently from excitement. Razel smiled and asked the king how he felt. Another man asked if they now understood that he had magic, and a third man expressed displeasure at the man's behavior. The king shouted that no technology could turn coal into diamonds, and a bystander, confused, asked what he meant. Exile said this was a common technique. The guy assumed she could only exist in his world. The king shoved the young man in the chest and told him to stop and be quiet. The man sneered, called the guy a useless swindler, and told him to get out of the castle. Reol laughed and called it sad. Fraud adjusted his glasses and smiled, saying it was such a sad life. Bonza couldn't believe the man was trying to trick them with a fake. Exile, stunned, reached out to the goddess. The man thought no one here knew this technique. The goddess stared at the man with cold indifference while he could not believe what was happening. The king called out to the worker to call the guards, and the worker immediately obeyed and ran away. After the knights arrived, the man was told to take his stone. The king warned Exile never to appear here again, and the man ordered him expelled. Some time later, Exile sat on a city street as surprised people walked past, and a girl pointed at him and asked her mom what was wrong with him. The woman warned her daughter not to look at him. The girl didn't understand why. Exile sat on the edge of the fountain and mumbled sadly about what he should do next. Exile remembered how the king had driven him away. It was hard to believe they had thrown him out so easily. Exile sat in indignation that they had dared to do this to him. He froze and went quiet. Looking up eagerly, the man said he needed to change the subject. Exile set off, thinking he should have planned his next steps, but for now he wanted to be sure about one thing. The young man went to the tools and weapons workshop, where purchases were made only from visitors. Exile was met at the entrance by a man who immediately greeted him. Exile was surprised to realize he had never seen the man before. The man set a gemstone on the counter and asked Exile if he would buy it. The seller was struck by the diamond's beauty. The man asked why the guy hadn't taken it to the jeweler. Exile said the diamond was fake. The guy thought trying to sell it to jewelers might be seen as fraud. Exile asked if any shops accepted fake goods. The man replied, annoyed that Exile must be joking. A man asked the seller whether he had ever considered using jewelry in industry, for example as a cutter or an image. The man was shocked and asked the guy what he was talking about. The guy said that if he sold the diamond to jewelers, he could live happily for 10 years. Exile replied with surprise that he understood and wondered whether anyone in this world was forging stones. Not expecting trouble with the jewelers, the man told the guy to leave and asked me in a disdainful tone which country treats diamonds, while Exile, disgusted that the diamond was artificial, wanted to sell it quickly and get the money, and the guy clicked his tongue in displeasure. Sighing, Exile asked roughly how much a night at the hotel cost, and the seller said the cheapest room was about 10,000 shares per night. The man sighed and said he understood. Exile asked him what he thought of the $70,000 offer for the diamond. The seller, desperate for money, was confused and reacted with shock at the young man's price. A man shouted angrily about what the other man was carrying and asked if it was some new kind of charity, and Exile said no, explaining he just didn't want people to think he was a fraud if artificial diamonds appear in the future. The seller was stunned and answered with a firm refusal, saying he would be accused of cheating. Exile watched the man in silence and then offered another option. Exile said the man valued the diamond but urgently needed money, so he suggested a deposit of $70,000. The man agreed and said the guy was probably in a difficult situation. Exile extended his hand and said they had reached an agreement, and the man shook the young man's hand to show he agreed. After that, the guy left the workshop, and the man asked him to come back. Exile thought he finally had the money, even though it took longer. Exile realized alchemy was undeveloped in this world. The currency system was completely different, and a difficult path lay ahead. Mary's hotel was quiet. The woman at the desk told the man he should leave here without food. Exile took a deep breath and said he was incredibly tired, pressing a hand to his head and adding that he was in a completely strange world. Opening his eyes, he decided he first needed to gather his thoughts. The man did not believe the goddess was from another world. She cast the interdimensional challenge spell, but he expected only a temporary displacement, and the magic here was very different from Exil's home world. He bolted out of bed and sat up, stunned that it couldn't be real, and realized he was in a parallel world. He waved his hand and activated the quantum space analysis, and after checking, he was stunned by what he saw. Rizal was puzzled, wondering why the laws of physics seemed not to apply here, and he noticed many unfamiliar substances. Falling back on the bed, he felt it was true. Rizal concluded that everything that had happened was not the doing of the imaginary goddess, and thought the king's exile of him must have surprised her. After thinking it over, he decided that from that day on his task was to save the world, but he did not know whether the goddess would be pleased if he killed the demon king. After that, he started to wonder what the demon king was like overall. Rizal pictured the demon king as selfish, powerful with magic, insane and determined to burn everything. He could not imagine how the demon could be so powerful, since nothing like it existed in his world. He rolled onto his other side, thinking everything here was different. The demons were intelligent and ruled by one leader, so he formed a guess. A thought crossed Rizal's mind that they might not be evil. He knew nothing about the situation here, and because of his exile, he did not expect any cooperation. Rising from bed, he said casually that he had made up his mind and now knew what to do. With confidence, he announced he would meet this demon king in person. Rizal wondered whether his world's magic would work here and activated a detection spell to test it. A small window immediately appeared in the air and he felt delighted. A reconnaissance satellite appeared before him, fitted with a printer used to survey an area. Releasing a small object out the window, he said he saw no problems with it and ordered the satellite to plot a route to the demon king's location. Rizal lay back on the bed, closed his eyes, and said he could sleep while the route was plotted. Morning arrived quickly, and at the first light, Rizal opened his eyes. The man was surprised he slept straight through until morning, and on waking found the route map already prepared and perfectly done. He used magic to roll up the card and activate his detection spell at the same time, then sensed someone else in the room. Using powerful detection magic, he discovered people hiding in his room secretly watching him. A quick scan showed there were 5 of them in all, and Rizal decided to use magic to eavesdrop on their conversation. One of them asked whether the other was sure Rizal was staying at that particular hotel. The other said there was no doubt. Rizal assumed the king had sent them. The man stepped outside, and the mercenaries immediately hid behind the roof. They realized he was exactly the one they needed, a summoned hero cast out of the palace. Rizal turned the corner and saw that the king was clearly against the man. The mercenaries asked whether everyone was in their places. They reiterated the plan to kill the target and bring his head as proof. Rizal glanced back briefly and considered taking advantage of the assassin aiming at him, a man named Grin. Seeing no one nearby, the mercenaries went ahead with the operation. One of them reached into his pocket after the order. Pulling out a small bundle, the attacker aimed a dart at Rizal's neck, and Rizal immediately realized it was a poison that would put him to sleep in seconds, and that the attacker could be stopped with defensive magic. Feigning unconsciousness, he fell to the ground, and the mercenaries gathered around him, saying the mission was complete, and the only thing left was to dispose of the evidence. A mercenary pressed his sword to Rizal's neck and grabbed his collar, and Rizal said something about a quick reception. In the next moment, the man sprang to his feet, greatly surprising the mercenaries in the room, and he unleashed lightning magic that left them stunned. Everyone in the room collapsed to the floor, trembling from the attack. Rizal created a fog around them and said the mercenaries could get some sleep. Reaching through the window, he checked something. The man assumed it was in his inventory. Rizal pulled out the multifunctional stem cell he had found. This cellular element is the basis for clones and is needed to clone a person to further train their skills. But he could not create high combat clones all the time, so he put the element away to keep it safe. Rizal thought it would not copy his abilities but would only take on the appearance of his body. The man used the technique of cellular differentiation. The next moment, a shell of a body appeared in front of him and Rizal started on the details, adding a bullet wound where needed and clothing it while the young man feared he might not even be allowed to live. After a while he finished and thought he had already used magic to restore the area, so others would take care of the rest. Rizal stretched wearily, noted that some unwanted work had arrived, and then declared firmly that they now needed to go to the place where the demons live. As dusk fell over the city, the man on the floor groaned and stirred. The mercenaries slowly regained consciousness and stood at a loss, unable to tell what had occurred. One suggested they had lost consciousness. Another said he was not sure and suspected their target's defensive magic had trapped them. Then one mercenary froze in shock and the others asked what had happened. Reisel's body lay on the floor before them. They looked at him and said he was dead. The mercenary shouted angrily that they'd just wasted their time and cursed at the man, then swung his sword and wounded him. The mercenary turned to the others and ordered them to take the head. They agreed, saying it was time to leave. A group of people left the crime scene and abandoned Rizal's body in the middle of a narrow alley. Late that night, a large moon rose over the dark castle. Razor looked at it and said it was probably a demon castle. 2 knights stood guard at the big gate when someone suddenly walked toward them, and they shouted in surprise for the stranger to stop. The knights quickly barred Razel's way with their spears. They told him to stand still and called him man. Razel looked a little surprised, and the knights asked what he was doing here. Razel said he wanted to speak with the Demon King and asked the knights to bring the man to him. The knights exchanged disbelieving looks. They raised their spears again and pointed them at the man, warning Razel not to joke with them and swearing as they spoke. The knights said it was impossible to believe a man could see the Demon King merely because he needed to talk to him. Razel raised his hands in confusion, apologized sincerely for the sudden visit, and said he would schedule a business meeting later. The man's behavior shocked the knights very much. They shouted they would not let anyone arrange a business meeting just to meet the Demon King, and the knight told the man to check his clothes first and stressed that he was a hero. Razel pushed the spear away from his face and said he was a hero, but the king had banished him. Everyone stared in shock at the man who had just spoken of the exile. The young man went on dramatically, saying he had almost been killed by the king's agents that morning, and the knight was shocked to hear about the assassins. Razel spoke with pity about what a man really is, then added that given what a man had been through, siding with the Demon King did not seem so strange to him, and he asked the knights whether they agreed. The knight aimed his weapon at the man again, making him sigh tensely, then shouted that everything was exactly as before, quoted another hero saying the enemy's enemy is a friend, and explained they would not make the same mistake again. Rizel saw this as a problem and said the strategy had already been used. While the man thought brainwashing magic was one possible explanation so far, so Rizel raised a finger and said he would change his question. Pointing to the top of the castle, he asked whether a pitiful barrier stood on that tower, and the knights froze in shock. One of them looked confused and tried to ask what it had been just now. The other angrily asked if the man had called him pathetic. The first knight, furious, shouted that the man dared to insult the demon lord's carefully built, all-powerful, universal barrier. The second knight panicked a little and called to his friend, telling him it was not worth talking about. Razel smiled contentedly at that and thanked the knights. The man realized he was really there. The first knight sat in shock, thinking about what he had blurted out. He quickly put on a confident face and said it was not important. He added that if the man thinks he can get through the barrier, he would like to see it. The second knight, confused, tried to call out to him. Razel winked at the knight to show he agreed, then waved his finger. The man did not think he would need powerful teleportation magic for a barrier of that level. A seal appeared under his feet. The man told the knights they would see each other again as his body slowly dissolved into thin air, and they couldn't believe he was serious. Reisel's body began to dissolve until it vanished completely. The knight couldn't make sense of what it had just witnessed, and they watched in shock as the man in front of them disappeared. Reisel dissolved into tiny molecules that raced toward a tall tower, where the man's body reassembled. Aware he was in the Demon King's chamber, the man set off. He had already decided his next move when someone suddenly called to him. Pointing at the man inside, the stunt girl rose from her throne, shocked, and demanded to know who he was. Razel looked at the girl and thought she was about 100 times more skilled than those at the gate, and clearly had plenty of battle experience. Shocked, the girl screamed at finding a man there, insisting it couldn't be, and asking the man if he meant the barrier had failed. And Razel said that if she was the one who set the barrier, he had something to say. He told the girl it would probably be better for him to call her the Princess of Darkness. She was very confused, and asked him to repeat what he had just said. The girl smiled contentedly and said she truly was the Princess of Darkness. She asked the man who he was and why he was there. Razel apologized to the princess for passing through her barrier without warning. At that moment, the girl screamed in surprise. Razel said he would be upset if he had damaged the girl's efforts, but since the barrier wasn't harmed, He asked the princess to forgive him, and the girl awkwardly said it was ridiculous that he had managed to pass through the barrier. Startled, the Princess of Darkness rose, wondering who the man was and uneasy because she did not know what he wanted, as he put his hand to his chest. Exile introduced himself to the princess and said he had been sent to this world to be a hero, but was expelled under certain circumstances, so he belonged to no side and had come to ask her about this world, leaving her in a stupor. The young man faced the Princess of Darkness and said he would ask her one last time. He asked the girl whether she would answer his questions. At that moment, dark energy wrapped the princess, and her face grew dark. A seal appeared at the princess's feet, and she began to say the hero had actually come to ask about such things, angrily telling the man not to joke with her. Exile stared at the seal beneath his feet and cursed under his breath, realizing he had likely chosen the wrong way to meet the princess. The man raised his hand and formed a small seal next to it. Moments later, the wall beside him exploded, and the girl attacked him, shouting indignantly that he was an impudent man. Exile calmly defended himself, thinking he had no proof he came here on his own, and not as a hero. The Princess of Darkness stood amid the rubble, ringed by a pillar of dust, and smiled, saying the guy was smart enough. The guy looked at the girl, standing in the same spot and deciding what to do next. Suddenly, Exile heard a noise as two demons burst into the room. Anxious, the girl asked Her Majesty if she was all right. Noticing the intruder, the demons stopped. The man looked at Exile and asked who he was. The Princess of Darkness warned her subjects to be careful, saying her attacks did not work on him. Exile estimated their power was about 80% of the girls. The man shouted to the princess that their attacks were failing. The demoness beside him told him not to panic because they were royal guards. No matter how hard it was, their main duty was to eliminate him. Exile scanned his surroundings and decided it was better not to show he was harmless, but he figured killing the two would be a blow against the Princess of Darkness. Exile looked up, decided this would pass as a threat, then waved his hand at the demons, making them flinch. The young man formed a large seal with a wave of his hand. He resolved to convince them that peaceful discussion was the best solution. Both the demon and the demoness froze in amazement. The Princess of Darkness panicked and called to Jack and Zarina through tears. Zarina gave a startled sigh when a red streak of blood appeared on her neck. Exile was busy working on the seal. The next instant, a stream of energy flowed around the servants of the Princess of Darkness, wrapped around their wounded necks, and they began to heal. Zarina sighed, confused and unsure what had just happened. Jack touched his neck and said he was sure he had just been beheaded. The Princess of Darkness asked tearfully whether they had just been reborn. Exile said he had never meant to kill them. The girl began talking, confused, about the necks of her servants. Exile sighed and told them they were overreacting. The demons stood stunned. The man said the demons really thought they were going to die because a head was flying through the air. The Princess of Darkness pointed at the man and angrily said he was the strangest person here, adding that no spell could let anyone survive after losing their head. Exile awkwardly asked if getting deeper into politics had dulled their understanding of magic, then let it pass, saying he thought no one would criticize the Princess of Darkness. Zarina protested, telling him not to be rude since Her Majesty is the Lord of Demons and the strongest. Then the Lord himself intervened. She closed her eyes and told Zarina to stop. Exile listened as the princess said it was clear this man was beyond their understanding. The princess told them to stop speaking that way. Zarina went quiet. Jack called to Her Majesty. The Princess of Darkness moved toward the young man and confirmed with Exile that he had come here to learn about this world. The Princess of Darkness smiled nervously at the man and agreed. She told him he could ask anything. Exile said he was glad the girl was finally ready to talk. Zarina spoke up, eager, saying they still weren't sure whether the man was an enemy and that something might happen. But the princess smiled, cut her off, and said they'd find out when the time came, so Zarina felt she should give up. The princess's servants turned to the girl, anxious. She said that rather than stay here and keep getting bruises, they should think about what to do to see at least a ray of hope. The girl insisted she had attacked him first and added that she felt he could become their ally if they talked things through properly. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said there was no need to worry, so the servants should wait outside. Exile sighed with relief, thinking it had been a bit hard, but it looked like everything would settle down now. When Princess Zarina finished speaking, Jack and Jack exchanged a look and nodded, then bowed and agreed to do as the girl wished, since her wish was law for them. An awkward silence filled the room. The demon princess leaned back on her throne and crossed her legs. Smirking at Razel, she said he could ask her anything he wanted to know. He returned a polite smile and thanked her for the chance. Kneeling, he said he had heard a fast-growing demon race was about to take over humanity and asked if that was true. The demon princess replied calmly that it was not. Razel stared at her in disbelief and asked what was wrong with those words. The girl sighed and said absolutely everything was wrong. First, the demons have not grown stronger in hundreds of years. Instead, they have steadily weakened. They never considered controlling people, and people are the ones who impose unfavorable conditions on demons. The demon princess quickly pulled out a neat document tied with a rope and tossed it to Razel, telling him to read it. Razel was surprised, grabbed the paper and asked what it was. The princess said these papers were a contract between humans and demons. Razel felt the royal magic emanating from him. The girl said calmly that he held the original papers. Razel, very confused, asked whether she was telling the truth. The princess remained calm and said everything was exactly like that. With a very serious expression, he opened the paper and began to read its contents. It was said that if a person commits a crime on the demon border, they will be judged under human law, and people will not be held responsible if a demon is harmed while among them. Horrified, Razel asked how she could have made such an unreasonable contract. The girl's face darkened as she explained that a few generations ago the demon king was killed by a hero. She said the strongest demon always became the lord of demons. On the day the demon king died, it became clear that no one could defeat the hero. The princess said that if they refused the terms, the hero would seize her throne and kill the girl, leaving her with no choice. Razel met the girl's eyes and said he understood her logic, then fell silent and watched her, noticing her hands shaking while he was lost in thought. Razel could not see why he was summoned here when such a powerful hero was already present, and he thought they might summon a new hero each time an old one died. But there were problems with that idea. The man looked at the demon princess and asked if he could ask her a question. The girl sat up and asked what he wanted to know. Razel gave the princess a quick look and asked whether the hero was still alive, and the girl was a little surprised. Taking a deep breath, she said he was alive. The girl added she would have destroyed the contract already if not for this hero. Razel handed her the contract and asked why they had called him here in that case. In disbelief, she asked whether he'd been expelled earlier. He looked at her and said, "That's exactly what happened," and he didn't see what was wrong with it. The princess grinned and said it turned out luck had been on Razel's side because he had barely escaped death. The man was stunned and asked what she meant. She said he had been brought into this world to be used as a victim. Hearing that, he went pale. Silence hung over the moonlit castle of the Demon King. In an instant, everything froze for one person. Coldly, the girl said people like him were called victims. He went pale and asked what she meant and whether she could tell him more about it. She covered her mouth with her hand inside. Lowering her eyes, the demon princess began her story and said it all began about 600 years ago with the very first call of the hero. She figured he probably wasn't that strong then. He still couldn't measure up to the four heavenly kings, Jack and Zarina's parents. Razel was a little surprised that the strongest were the parents of the two he had shown his skills to not long ago. The girl said the heroes who came after were all about equally strong. The higher-ranking people were amazed, and at that time they named the goddess who brought the strongest heroes. Razel sighed and said that all this had led to what happened, and that it was extremely troublesome. The demon princess agreed and then, surprised, asked if he really knew all this himself. At that moment, Razel thought someone from this world could still create such a magical artifact, which seemed more likely than the other possibilities. He looked at her and asked whether the goddess had been involved in making those magical artifacts. The princess was a little surprised, then looked down in frustration and said it was obvious. Razel thought for a moment and said the first hero had been far stronger than the first demon king back then. Hearing that, the princess bared her teeth viciously. After the first hero helped them defeat the demons, they kept summoning more heroes, who then called on others to fight the world's monsters and demons, and when they reached their limit, They allowed the first hero to devour them. The girl said that after that, everything would repeat itself over and over, and she added that right now the first hero is even more powerful than he has ever been. Relaying the king's words, she said they had no idea the demon king might appear, so they created the strongest hero on Razel's side, and she found it surprisingly easy to imagine. The demon princess took a deep breath, lifted her head, and leaned back against the throne. The girl said she had no more information. Razel paused and said he understood everything, and that meant that if it was true, the goddess and that hero were his enemies, and he had come here to ask the goddess for a favor. Knowing she intended to sacrifice her assistant, he realized that option was gone as well. The man stood up and asked the princess if he could check her story. She looked a little confused but quickly composed herself and said she did not mind. Razel raised his hand. A neat information window appeared quickly, and he planned to gather evidence from his satellite analysis. The girl watched the strange force closely. It looked like detection magic, but she had no idea at all what he intended to do with it. At that moment, neat marked paths appeared on the Razel screen. The man noted that all their souls no longer looked human at all. The man said quietly that he had found traces of a magical artifact and of the palace's first hero, which proves the demon princess was right. Stunned, the girl asked what it meant and how he had managed to scout the situation in the palace, finding it incredible. Razel turned calmly and said the analysis would be fairly easy if she had everything she needed. The princess sank back on her throne and said it was very good, then casually added that she'd like them to have something like it. And the girl was amazed that Razel faced no obstacles at all. Pouting, the girl said she had suspected from the start that he didn't need her at all, and asked if that was true. Razel said calmly this was exactly the case, but without her he wouldn't have thought the first hero could still be in the palace. Looking away, he said he never would have known he was going to be a victim, and Razel smiled and sincerely thanked the princess for telling him about it. The girl blushed and looked away at once, saying these were all just small things. Razel was deep in thought and planned that if he met the goddess, he would persuade her she had no choice but to send him back to his world, knowing this would be the best way to make the terrible man worry. He believes the first hero can be used as a hostage, but he also understood that this would not help the Princess of Darkness, and then he gasped and said he understood everything. The man turned to this princess firmly. His abrupt tone left her confused, and she loudly asked what was wrong and what he wanted. Razel grinned and asked whether she would be willing to defeat the first hero herself. The girl froze at once. The princess believed this man had arranged the same pact and murdered his ancestors. Destroying him, she said, had been her life's goal. As a descendant of all former lords, she could not pass up the opportunity. The princess gave the man a serious look and replied firmly that she wanted to, and Razel smiled and said everything was settled. The man asked the girl if she liked his idea, promised to teach her himself, leaving the princess very confused, and Razel also guaranteed she would surpass the hero's strength. The girl pouted a little and asked awkwardly why he was going so far. Razel closed his eyes and said calmly to the girl that he only wanted to return to his world and that he would have to make some decisions. Surprised, the Princess of Darkness stared at the man and said this was how things really were. She added that he also had a purpose. The girl awkwardly asked where he got the idea that she would become stronger than the hero, which caught him off guard. Razel told the girl their strength was only 1/5 of his, and he was serious when he said it was a level anyone could reach with some effort. The girl looked at the man doubtfully and said 1/5 sounded difficult. Razel stood up and asked if she was the strongest of her people. The man said that if she studied, everything would work out. Razel smiled and added it would get easier once the girl learned her weaknesses. The princess murmured something thoughtful in response. The girl stood and walked toward the man and said she would agree if he insisted, and she sounded determined. Razel smiled at the princess, noticing she was deliberately approaching the situation. The Princess of Darkness and the hero shook hands. She said she was glad to cooperate. He told her they would use a teleporter and that she should be ready. The princess, nervous, asked what that meant, and then asked if they could avoid using it. Panic made the girl clutch her face. At that moment, Razel asked if she knew a place to practice. The question brought her back to her senses. Razel said he wanted to see what the girl could do. The princess thought for a moment and said there was a square a few kilometers from here. The man opened the map in front of her, and she pointed to a spot, saying it was around here. Reisel said he hoped they'd get in. The man put his arm around the girl's shoulder and told her to hold on tight. The princess looked at him, a little excited, and asked if they would really fly that far. Reisel smiled and said everything was correct. A large seal formed beneath the princess and the hero's feet, and the girl cried that she wasn't mentally ready as their bodies began to dissolve into particles that quickly moved toward the right place, prompting the princess to cry out again. Eventually they reached the appointed spot, where there was hardly anyone. The Princess of Darkness was barely holding on, bent over and breathing hard with her head down. Exhausted, the girl felt it had been a real nightmare, and she was amazed that the magic had carried them that distance in an instant while Reisel looked at her awkwardly and apologized. The princess sat up and replied weakly that nothing was wrong with it, then asked the man what kind of thing it was. Reisel told the princess it was a magical barrier, a mirage, and she looked puzzled and asked what he meant. So Reisel smiled and said it only looked like they were exercising from the outside, which left her even more confused. Grinning, the guy told the girl that no one would see her shame so she could relax, and the princess grudgingly thanked him for his care, thinking this was what he had planned. Reisel said he thought the girl was ready for battle. The princess looked slightly surprised, turned, and said yes. The Princess of Darkness looked confidently at the relaxed man and said they would fight at full strength this time. Reisel smiled and said they could begin their fight, and the girl looked resolutely at the hero before her. She prepared, pictured how the man might attack, decided she had to stop him, then accepted that it might be better to avoid the attack. The man who had been standing in front of the princess suddenly vanished, leaving the girl stunned and confused as she opened her eyes and realized the young man was gone. The Princess of Darkness stood and felt magic all around, certain it was dispelling magic, and she knew attacking at an unknown point was useless, so she decided to concentrate, aware that even if distracted, there was still a place with stronger magic. At that moment she snapped her eyes open and clicked her teeth in displeasure when she noticed something. The girl spun around, cast a spell, and shouted that he was here, and at the same moment a small stone hit the princess's head, making her cry out softly as she looked at the stone that had fallen nearby, wondering what it was. The girl leaned closer and saw it was just an ordinary ball. Pain made her press her head. Moments later, Reisel appeared behind her and said the ball vanishes after 3 seconds, then told her to try dodging him. The princess spun around in surprise, convinced it was real telepathy, and Reisel grinned, saying he had used no magic, only amplification, which left the girl very surprised. Her fist clenched in indignation. Reisel smiled and said he expected something interesting from her. He cheered her on, thinking it sounded good. The girl, displeased, thought she would kill him. The Princess of Darkness was furious and bared her teeth, insisting she could dodge, but Reisel smiled and slipped past her, and the ball struck her head again, making her scream. Much time has passed since training began. The sun was slowly sinking below the horizon. The princess swiftly blocked the ball heading toward her. Sweating and exhausted, the girl thought about how she had defended herself when a man praised the princess, and Reisel told her to attack now, leaving her very surprised. The Princess of Darkness stared at the man, ready to attack. Watching his movements, she realized her sight hadn't adjusted yet. He slowed down, but that did not make the princess feel any better. She relaxed and took a deep breath, then thought she'd have to try something else, and Reisel noticed something immediately. The dark princess spread her arms wide and closed her eyes as many seals surrounded her. Reisel assumed they were fire arrows, muttered a curse, and raised another barrier just in case, while the man turned and clicked his tongue in displeasure. Gathering her strength, the Princess of Darkness launched a quick side attack, shouting for her to strike. Breathing hard but smiling broadly, the girl asked the guy how he felt while Reisel, very confused, watched fragments fall beside him, and the man turned in shock to see a huge hole where his barrier had been destroyed. The girl was breathing hard. The princess smiled broadly and said she had finally succeeded. Right after that, the girl collapsed to the ground and said she was tired. The barrier kept crumbling. Reisel wondered whether she thought his defenses were so weak he could not defend himself. Needing a bit more effort to create the magical barrier made by ancient magicians, he will not show weakness or inexperience and must do his best to show his magical skill. As the girl tried to catch her breath, the man stepped forward and offered his hand, surprising the Princess of Darkness. She accepted his help and smiled at Razel, asking if they could begin. The man wondered how far the Princess of Darkness would go. Smiling back, he said that since she insisted, he agreed. Razel spoke words that would immediately start a moving barrier, and the princess, shocked, interrupted him and hoarsely shouted that she needed to rest again. After that, they rested for a while. The girl looked at the man and asked what kind of barrier he meant. Razel said he would make a small dome, and her task would be to destroy it with magic. Defiant, the girl stared at the guy and asked about the small dome, saying he really thought she could not. And Razel formed a barrier around himself and said the girl would prove it to him. A dome surrounded Ryza, and he smiled as he told the girl that the barrier blocked any magical attacks. The Princess of Darkness smiled, convinced the man had overstepped, and said she would consider his words. The girl created a huge seal and said menacingly that the guy had underestimated her strength. The Princess of Darkness fired a powerful attack straight at the man trapped inside the barrier. Her attack hit the barrier but could not reach him. In shock, she asked whether the barrier really blocked magic. Silent, the girl stood before the man and watched as he did not even react to her attack. Razel removed the protection and warned the girl not to think he was joking, and she snapped at him over his sudden boldness, saying it was no big deal and that she couldn't do it the first time. The Princess of Darkness turned away sadly from the man who had told her not to sulk, leaving him confused, and she, with tears in her eyes, asked what he wanted. Razel hesitated awkwardly, then apologized and said he still did not know her name, and the Princess of Darkness, annoyed, told him he had only just decided to find out. The girl admitted it was her fault too, introduced herself as Mercia, the Princess of Darkness, and thanked him for volunteering to help her. Razel shyly thanked the girl for her trust, genuinely pleased, and said that if they were serious, they should switch to merciless skills. The guy said the girl's magic power was very high, but her technique was clearly weak, so her attacks ended up weak. The girl said she did not understand and asked him to explain it more simply. Razel asked them to picture Mercy's magic as a pump. The force's power is the hose's thickness, technique is the water pressure. The outlet can have high or low pressure, and the magic circle represents her skills. He hoped that made it much clearer why she couldn't attack, and the girl agreed. Using a man and a dragon as an example, the gap in their power makes the dragon's victory seem obvious. But if the man's magic is raised a little, the dragon can be overwhelmed by a focused attack, and the man will emerge the clear winner, crowned the strongest magician. Razel said simply that the girl needed training to learn how to distribute her magic correctly and focus on the target, and that he would teach her everything so she could defeat the most powerful monster in Demon. The girl said she was ready and asked what she needed for this. The man told Mercia they would first learn to create a three-dimensional magic dome. The princess eagerly repeated his words. Razel realized he would have to work hard and noticed the girl still did not understand something. Magic domes can have different shapes, he said. You can make a flat one that is not very strong. Razel said he would also teach her how to make a three-dimensional dome with infinite strength. In other words, merciless magic would become three-dimensional. The princess realized she could never have imagined this was a whole science. Asked the man if that meant her skills would increase without limit, and Razel answered with satisfaction that she was correct. Mercia said skeptically that she could not retrain fast enough to learn to build such a dome, and asked if the man could shorten their course of study. Razel said he would need to work a little since, as the girl knows, he did not master this magic at birth, and it had taken him a long time to achieve the result. Mercia said she was not willing to wait that long and called him boring. She said she would ask him a question then. The girl wanted to know why he agreed to train her. Mercia said his goal was completely different. To return to his world, she asked why they could not just kill the hero and take what they needed. She saw no reason to complicate the training. Rise will agree. The man said she was right and gave two reasons. The first was the information he could get. The second was that she might think he was grateful she had let him see the truth. After that, he decided to add something else. Razel said he wanted the girl to come into his world as an adventurer after the victory. The Princess of Darkness was surprised. The man said he'd give the woman time to think about his proposal, and Mercia called to him in confusion, asking what it meant. Razel said there is one enemy in his world who is very hard to defeat, and his strength is not enough. and if they join forces, they might have a chance to get rid of him. A guy helps a girl and she returns the favor. It's simple. Mercier asked whether he intended to face a creature twice his strength. It was simply impossible. But when Roselle turned to the girl, he said that seeing her determination and perseverance made him realize they had a chance. Saying they needed a lot of training, he told the girl not to waste their precious time. Mercier agreed and invited the guy to start. Mercy declared she would become the best magician, and he would see it later. She said she would learn to create a three-dimensional dome. Her power would grow without limit. They will defeat all their enemies and help each other gain strength and truth. Roselle liked the girl's attitude and said so. The girl then asked if she could ask something else. The man asked in surprise what it was about, and Mercia said she had a younger sister who was just as strong as she was. Not long ago, she fell ill with a mysterious disease. If Mercia must leave her kingdom to go to another world with a man, she wants her sister to take her place as the next princess of darkness. Now weakened, she can no longer fight as she once did, but no one equals her at ruling. The girl said that maybe in the man's world they could find an antidote to cure her sister and restore her strength, and Roselle admitted he wasn't good at medicine and kept thinking about the mysterious disease. The man said he would help Mercy care for the princess and do everything possible to find an antidote, which made the princess ask if it was true and thank him warmly. She set off and asked the guy why he got up, adding that they needed to get back to the castle at once because she wanted to tell her sister right away. Roselle agreed and asked her to avoid strong drinks this time, like last time. The girl awkwardly replied that she didn't drink at all. Outside, it was already the middle of the night and the large moon hung above the horizon. Sitting on the couch and lost in a book, the girl looked up when a portal opened in front of her, and she was very surprised. Terrified by the distorted space, the girl thought they wanted to attack. Mercia and Razel appeared in front of her. The man apologized for taking so long. She called out to her younger sister with relief and happiness. Mercia sank to the floor and apologized to the girl for frightening her, and the little sister told her not to jump to conclusions because she did not recognize her sister's magic. And when the girl asked who the man was, Mercia smiled, sure she would be surprised. The Princess of Darkness said his name is Roselle, one of the strongest warriors from another world. She said he could defeat and cancel her magic in moments, even bypass the barrier, and that one of his spells could catch her off guard. Overall, he is an extraordinary magician and warrior. Rizal asked the girl if she was exaggerating. Mercia replied awkwardly that she was, but only a little. She looked at the man and sighed, saying he was truly a unique person. Mercia took her sister's hands and said she had brought him here hoping he could cure her, leaving the girl very surprised at the reason for the young man's arrival. The princess repeated herself and told the girl not to worry, saying everything would be fine, and that even if the guy couldn't help, they would keep fighting with a smile on her face, so she urged the girl to give him a chance to try to heal her. The princess's younger sister said hesitantly that if a girl trusts a man, she wouldn't mind. Roselle smiled at the sisters, seeing how much they trusted each other and how strong their bond was. At that moment, Mercia called the man's name and asked him to come over. He agreed, saying he would not delay. The young man crouched in front of the girl and greeted her, saying he was very pleased to meet her and asking her not to be nervous because he would not hurt her. The girl thanked him and said she trusted him completely. The princess asked him to be careful with her sister because her sister is more receptive than she is. Rysel said he understood. Mercia, annoyed, noted how clever he was. The girl asked him what illness her sister had and then, excited, whether a magical impulse caused it. Roselle said that because the magical power was so concentrated, her small body could not withstand the flow of energy, and he said that explained why her magic and health were so unstable. The man listened mercilessly and attentively to the guy, and the girl asked if it was a serious illness. He told her not to worry. There is an antidote that can restore the concentration of the flow, and once it takes effect, her strength will return to normal. The medicine was made to suppress energy and improve health, but she will have to wait a few days for it to work. He told Mercia that once the pill entered her system, its effect would last a lifetime. Amazed, she asked if that was true. The man handed over the medicine and told her to take the capsule, and she agreed. Excited, she called to the girl, and Mercy smiled with care, saying everything was fine because they trusted the guy. The princess's younger sister nodded and quickly put the medicine in her mouth, swallowing it. The girl exhaled calmly. Mercia quickly asked her if the medicine had started to work. She replied that nothing had changed. Mercy started shouting angrily at the man about why it wasn't working, asked if the pill was expired, and he plugged his ears, repeating that the pill would take effect only in a couple of days. He reminded them he'd already said the drug would take several days to fully work. The man said he'd have to wait a bit, and the girl, confused, said everything was fine. Rizal touched the stone on the girl's forehead with his finger and said they should give the medicine for exactly a week, and the girl agreed. The princess's sister looked at her hands in surprise and asked what it was. She said her flow of power had become much calmer and she could feel it. Mercia said it was amazing, and the girl agreed with her sister. Mercia hugged her little sister, tears in her eyes, saying she would definitely be cured now. The girl agreed happily, and Rizal watched them with a smile, thinking they had solved that problem as well. The girl kept looking at her hands, hesitated briefly, then said firmly they could begin. Mercia was nervous too, but only agreed with her sister. Rizal watched in silence. The girl poured her magic into the vase until it broke down into its parts. Delighted, she said everything had worked and that she could. Mercia was amazed that her little sister could separate the vase's alloy into different minerals. Smiling, Rizal said even high-difficulty spells would now be very easy for her. Smiling broadly, she said it was wonderful, because now she will be able to handle simple magic. Mercier burst into tears and said it was wonderful, and because her little sister could cure the princess's terrible illness. The girl wiped the princess's tears, said it was true, and asked her sister to calm down a little. Rizal also said the mushy mass of magic that caused the Shishiel's disease is unlike anything else. If you use this medicine, you will earn thanks from people or even from magical forces. Mercia looked at him and asked what could suddenly happen. The man smiled and said he had eaten, and suggested changing the wording to say, "This medicine must be given to every soldier to boost the army's strength." Confused, Mercy looked at him and asked if they could produce this medicine in large quantities. The man admitted that when sales of the medicine began, it was sent to children in poor countries. The manufacturer overproduced in the first batch, and now the medicine is widespread, and the woman asked whether this was just clearing out stock. The princess grinned and said that even with devastation, something could still be used. Rizal smiled at her and said this suited her best. Mercier said cheerfully that they needed to send people out right away because she would be there very soon. At that point, Rizal and Shishiel were left alone. The girl asked whether he wanted to move closer to his sister. The man thought for a moment and took a deep breath, but she suddenly interrupted him and said it was very difficult, and he looked up, surprised. She said her sister was indeed the most influential person in the country, and others trusted her. The girl added that this was exactly what she was worse at than Mercia, and Rizal wanted to answer, but the girl said that was just the way things were. Surprised, he watched the girl smile broadly as she said that, despite everything, if he truly needed a sister and Mercia wanted it, she would stop at nothing. She smiled broadly and said she would do absolutely everything for her sister. Rizal fixed his gaze and smiled gently, saying he relied on her for this. Turning to Shishiel, he asked if she had any political experience, and she looked surprised, laughed nervously, and admitted she was terribly embarrassed because she had none. Rizal sipped her tea and said she should use it. He handed her the papers and explained that when she wanted to learn, it would offer professional knowledge to help her become an expert. This is called the Educational Simulator. After their talk, an awkward silence settled in the room. The men didn't know what to say and just looked at each other. Mercier ran in smiling and said she was back and had distributed everything correctly. Shishiel looked at her sister and still awkwardly greeted Mercia. The Princess of Darkness hesitated and asked if anything had happened while she was gone. Rizal grabbed her shoulder and said she had already returned, and the girl went pale. He sat down on the couch with a merciful air and said he needed to extract some of her memory, leaving her briefly confused before she agreed without much thought. She sat down calmly and waited to see what Rizal would do. Suddenly she understood his words and asked loudly what they meant and what he planned to extract from her memory. Rizal said she needed to stay calm and avoid losing consciousness. All her practical experience will be recorded in this educational simulator. She explained that, in short, It was a magical tool that draws on her memory to create educational materials. Mercia asked if that was the case. Razel pulled out a few items and said she was right. The girl put the object in her hair and said she had been able to until now, but now she did not understand what was happening. Razel asked if she was ready to experience the difference between the worlds. Mercia said everything was fine because she could. Razel smiled and told the girl she was very well prepared. He touched the object and said that, in that case, they should start, and a notification appeared that he had received magic memory crystals in his equipment as the girl concentrated. When the girl heard she could have everything, something began to seep into her consciousness, and Shishiel looked visibly nervous as she watched her sister. A voice announced the Earth and Demon Control Simulator setup was complete. The girl took the object from her hair and asked whether that was all. Razel confirmed he was done and told her to try it once. Confused, Shishiel said she understood. Razel told her to click the red magic stone in the center. At that moment, Shishiel's image appeared on the screen and she looked surprised. The system said they should explain how the current situation is coping and spare a thought for it, noting the famine 2 years ago, so they need to choose a 3 on Training Street. Surprised, Shishiel said she could not predict how the situation would improve and decided to try switching to Mode 2 while Mercia watched in silence. The system said this was the correct answer, and she was very happy she could do it, adding that choosing 2 would work well. Mercia announced with pride that she had put the regime in place. Shishiel admired it as impressive and said it was exactly what she expected from her sister. The success left Mercia proud. Razel came over and said the stimulant was very good. She agreed and said he was helping a lot. The girl looked at the princess and said she would try it now and keep trying afterward. Mercier patted the girl's head and said she was counting on her. They were very happy. The next day the guys met and Razel said that from now on the second part of her training would begin so she could surpass the daredevil she met. And when he asked if she was in good shape, she said she was in perfect shape and was counting on him. The girl explained that her private room would be needed for training, and the guy quickly agreed. He told her to use the device to release the magical energy this time, and she asked what it was while watching the statuette on the table. Razel said this magical device pushes magical energy out of the area, leaving only a tiny concentration. In that environment, magic drains from living bodies and breaks down, so the ambient magical level remains constant. Mercia asked whether it would affect her body. He warned that if she left it as it was, she would not have enough magic power and would die. Mercia was amazed. Razel laughed, said it usually doesn't come to this and he didn't need to worry, then asked what he was going to do with the device. He said he wanted to keep the stronger magic inside his body and control it with his body's strength, which surprised her. He said he avoids the complex magical environment when leaving the magical force, and that turning to light magic is usually governed by consciousness, so he advised her to try lighting a long, burning candle. She said awkwardly that she understood and looked visibly nervous. Mercia approached the candle enthusiastically, said she was free to do so, told the guy to look, and then the candle went out immediately, leaving her staring at it in disbelief. The Princess of Darkness grew more serious. Trying to cheer herself, she said that as a demon it should be easy for her. Razel watched closely, but the candle would not light. The guy smiled at her second failure, and she grew angry. Mercy watched the candle and shouted for it to catch fire faster. A small spark appeared on the wick, and she cried out with joy. The light went out immediately, and the girl, upset, pursed her lips. Mercier shouted sadly, asking what it was all about, while the girl wondered whether she had used up all her power casting magic and said she was not suited for the job, and Razel smiled at the princess and asked if she was already giving up. The girl sat up with a tear-streaked face, quiet at first, then said firmly that she would keep trying until she succeeded. Razel smiled and closed his eyes, saying everything was as he thought, while Mercia raised her hands and said she would do it. At that moment, someone knocked on the door. Razel opened it and saw Shishiel standing in front of him. Someone had brought tea, and he told her to be quiet. Shishiel peered into the room at what the man had pointed out and saw her sister absorbed in training. Suddenly, Mercia grabbed her head and screamed in frustration, while Razel and Shishiel just smiled when they saw it. The princess's younger sister quickly handed the tea tray to the man, who looked puzzled, and went into the room herself. Upset by the failure, Mercia suddenly noticed a little sister standing before her, looking at her warmly. Each sister began practicing on her own, and Razel brought a tray with the tea the girl had left for him. Time passed, and the candle the princess held suddenly caught fire. Mercier looked at her with quiet surprise and delight. Shishiel and Reconstructing were surprised too. The princess cried out in joy at her success and hurried to hug her little sister. Razel looked at her thoughtfully and said it was not bad for a first try, and that the magic had not leaked out and the fire had not gone out. Mercy then declared again that she would not give up. The princess collapsed onto the table inside, saying she was exhausted. Razel said that since the girl could handle it, they would slowly increase the spell's difficulty. The man added that if she wanted to use attacking magic, she could bring it up at any time. Soon, the girl will be able to use movement magic to transfer into the competition arena. Mercia said her first goal was to learn the magic of unconsciousness. Shishiel said happily that the girl would certainly be transferred next time. Mercia added that the girl had really become stronger. Some time passed since then, and the guys returned to the competition arena where the girl was training. Mercy folded her arms and slowly gathered energy between them, which swelled to a great size as Razel watched. The man checked the bundle of energy and told the girl it would do. Mercia released the gathered energy, and it quickly dissipated. Mercia smiled and said it was great. The girl told her she had done a good job and was sure the appearance and disappearance were perfect. Razel said the girl was doing well because she had progressed to this in less than a month. He decided they could stop the device now. Mercier looked at the man and asked whether they should give an exam on using magic now that the goal had been reached. Razel smiled at the princess, saying he'd been thinking about it and began to explain what her current training would be. A barrier appeared at the man's feet as a protective wall rose in front of Razel. He looked at the girl and spoke the words that would create three-dimensional magical barriers. Mercia looked at him in surprise and repeated that these would be three-dimensional magical barriers. Razel told the princess their foundation lies on the surface, and they are called multi-layered, and the girl said they should be protective magical barriers, and overlapping two-dimensional barriers form three-dimensional ones. The man said real three-dimensional magic barriers must form instantly, because building them piece by piece takes time and they collapse at the slightest breeze. He gave the girl a defiant look, asking if she could handle it. Mercia returned the same smile so he would not doubt. The girl believed that if she tried, she would succeed. Repeating the thought in her head, Mercia concentrated and began to form a barrier. Small pieces quickly gathered into a tall wall. Razel admired her focus and the exactness of her construction. After a few moments, Mercier happily spoke the few words she could. Razel said it was not bad, especially for a start. The girl added with satisfaction that it was exactly right, since she is the Princess of Darkness. The man asked the princess to check how strong her barrier was, and she was very surprised. At the same time, an explosion went off in the wall beside her, making her scream. When the smoke cleared, Mercier was surprised to see he had really protected her. Mercia touched the barrier and said it had not a single scratch. Razel said multi-layered magic barriers are a higher level than two-dimensional ones, and the man asked the girl if she could feel this horror. The princess called the magical barrier beautiful, and had a seething feeling she had made it herself. Rise will reply that their goal was three-dimensional magic barriers, so they should add more layers. Mercia said with an enthusiastic smile. It was great, and they should do it then. Happily, she told Razel to look at the powerful magical barrier that had formed. A man said the girl was doing well, and that her barrier could easily withstand an attack. Mercia fell to the floor, saying she had done it, and was delighted by how cool it looked. Mercia lay on the floor, exhausted, and said the words that turned out to take a lot of concentration. Razel held out his hand to the girl and told her she had done a great job. Looking at her, the man said that starting tomorrow they would begin serious study of three-dimensional magic cubes and magic manipulation with her, and that the princess should rest for now. The girl stood up inside. Confidently, she said she did not need rest because there was no time to relax, and that she should learn the basics of magic as soon as possible, and Razel understood and said it was to be expected from a girl. Razel grinned and warned Mercy that he would be strict with her later. The princess said she understood everything and asked him to be faster. Later, Razel approached the girl, explaining Mercia had mentioned a special place where she wanted to continue training. He asked whether this was the place, and the girl smiled and confirmed it. Smiling, the Princess of Darkness looked at the view and said it was a food warehouse next to the Demon Kingdom in a large plantation, and that the landscape here was simply beautiful. Maintaining such a large territory that supplies the kingdom with agricultural products is difficult because rain is rare here, so higher-ranking demons send rain to the plantation once or twice a year to sustain the fields and crops. Razel was surprised to say how much precipitation the area needs, and he now understood why the girl chose these lands for training. He closed his eyes, smiled, and said this was not the only reason Mercia had brought him here, then asked whether that was true, and whether she had anything else to say. Mercia wanted to try a multi-layered magic barrier to create rain and irrigate the fields herself, and the man, surprised, asked whether she had developed the method. But although it was true this would be her first practical use, so she was unsure. Razel realized the girl wanted him to support her for that reason. Mercy said she was just afraid something might go wrong, and that instead of rain, she could trigger an explosion that would put the kingdom in danger. Mercia felt deeply embarrassed, and Razel admired her effort, believing she had trained hard to create the magic barrier because the princess wanted to help her people. Razel suggested to the girl they first practice making a simple magic barrier, then move on to the rain, and Mercia happily agreed. The princess began to create a barrier. Razel examined everything carefully and said he believes this formula, by increasing crop yields, encouraging growth, and stabilizing nutritional value, could cause precipitation. The man suggested Mercia create a simple circle for now, and then slowly start entering her formula. If anything went wrong, he would tell them immediately and they would stop training, and the girl quickly agreed. Mercia calmed and focused after that, thinking about what she needed to focus on. Rings of energy quickly surrounded the girl. Razel watched the princess and was sure she could build a barrier and control magic. Razel found making a magic circle terrifying. He told the girl it had turned out well. The man suggested activating it with magic. Mercia quickly said she understood. The Princess of Darkness slowly revealed her powers, and the circle of her power expanded until it became enormous. Suddenly, a few drops hit the ground, and then rain began, immediately drawing the attention of ordinary residents. Shouts rose that it was the blessed rain of the Princess of Darkness, and people noticed this year had a much larger magic circle, so they thanked the princess loudly while the girl smiled and said she could. At that moment, Mercia noticed something and quickly turned to the man to ask what had happened. Razel smiled and said it was perfect. A man said this year's harvest would be larger than usual. The girl collapsed to the floor inside. Tears filled the eyes of the Princess of Darkness. She said it was good. Razel believed she never showed tears, even during hard training. Mercy began saying they would no longer have to rely on the human race. She thought about how ashamed she was to cry in front of a man. The man cried out in surprise. Razel asked the girl, confused, if there really was plagiarism. Despite the food supply, he asked when the delivery would end. Mercia replied in disbelief that they had to copy them to feed themselves. Razel felt relieved, thinking being even a little late would make things worse, so he said he understood, and the girl said that this year the Lord is on their side. Mercia lifted her head and said the people would not starve now, and she looked calmly at the sky while the man said the harvest would be good. Smug, the princess said she would like to see the faces of merchants who export humans, and Razel, confused, agreed. It's been a long time. In the royal capital, the Lily were minding their own business when someone sighed, sounding puzzled and clearly displeased, clutching a paper in his hands. The king, clearly angry, demanded to know what kind of pathetic sales those were after hearing about a 95% drop in crop exports. The second man, frightened, asked what it was, and the man threw a paper at his feet and said it was nonsense. The king began shouting, asking what was going on, and the second man cowered in fear and hesitated. He said that recently, when the number of merchants dropped, he made a direct request to the demon diplomat. The man said he was told that since the demon's food self-sufficiency had exceeded 100%, there was no need to import humans from now on. The king sighed again, more displeased, and the employee feared things would stay the same, remembering that an official had once been executed for insulting the king and realizing he was in a difficult position. The king said the arrogance of these demons knows no limits. Turning to Regis, he asked if the 3 summoned heroes were equipped. The servant replied that, of course, they were ready. The king ordered Regis to command the summoned heroes to storm the demon lord's castle. Regis looked at the king in surprise, trying to clarify. The king ordered them to kill the demon lord and add a clause to the contract requiring the demon tribe to buy the same amount of harvest each year as they did last year. Regis turned to the king and spoke respectfully, saying the summoned heroes could not defeat the demon lord in their current state, and the king, pleased, said he understood perfectly. At that moment the king remembered Article 7, Paragraph 3, which said the demon tribes could not kill summoned heroes, and Regis, slightly shocked, said that was the right thing to do. The king explained that the demon tribe had broken the treaty and killed the summoned heroes, which would lead to an all-out war between humans and demons. Regis replied that the dead summoned heroes could no longer be used for synthesis. The man looked at the servant and said the demons were causing trouble, so he ordered them to destroy the demons first, not caring if 1 or 2 of the summoned heroes died, and Regis bowed and apologized. The king frowned, waved his hand, and said that since they understood, they could leave. Regis agreed and asked forgiveness, and the employee apologized, exhaling with relief. Studying the scroll beside him, the man talked about how stupid demons are. Not knowing their tactics, he resolved to make sure they learned not to go against the human race. Walking down the corridor, the man suddenly heard someone talking about an attack on the king's castle. A man stepped closer, asked if this was the right room, and, thinking he had just heard something about the demon lord's castle, leaned against the door because eavesdropping was not his strength. The man heard the king order the heroes summoned, killed, and sent to synthesis to start an all-out war between humans and the demon tribe, and he realized it was the king's voice and assumed the heroes were being used. Walking down the corridor, the man denied everything and told himself that if he had wanted to kill them, he would have done it long ago. Banzas stopped suddenly and seriously considered whether the king really intended to kill them. The man cut off that stream of thoughts, smiled slightly, and decided he was overthinking it. Meanwhile, the wind blew across the vast desert. Mercy said again that there really was nothing in this wilderness. The Princess of Darkness asked Gricelle if he really wanted to arrange a fight in a place like this. Gricelle said they had made great progress in the past 6 months and were already cramped in the usual arena, and he added that there were no settlements or buildings here. Razel smiled at the girl and asked if it was time for her to use her strength fully. After a moment, Mercia said she understood. He urged the princess to set up a fight without those restrictions, and Mercia agreed, saying they should give it their all this time. Light flared beneath the girl's feet as many weapons formed behind her. She conjured a magic spear and quickly aimed it at the man. Razel realized the spears were magical, so a simple defense would not stop them, and he formed a hard shell to protect himself from the spears. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said that if the man acted like that, he could take it. She attacked him again. Razel saw it as self-inflicted pain and decided to use a magnetic counter. The girl's attack hit the man and quickly bounced back to her. Mercia, shocked, asked what it was, and in a panic she said this could not be. Setting Mercy aside and feeling displeased, she dodged quickly, cursed inwardly, then exhaled in relief after evading the attack. Razel smiled and asked whether it was a good idea, feeling it was time to fight back. A dark fog closed in around the girl, startling her, and Mercia covered her face, assuming it was a neurotoxic mist. She cleared her throat and the man agreed, believing everything was exactly as she said. Razel thought the girl could use the same antidote magic he used. The Dark Princess smiled as she gathered a ball of energy in her hands, and Razel was stunned to realize it was more than an antidote. Mercia drove her attack straight at the man, shouting for him to disappear. Razel was instantly overwhelmed by the girl's strength. The Princess of Darkness looked at the man in surprise and asked what it was, and Razel smiled, saying this really was all the girl had, and noting there was not a scratch on it. Mercia, very confused, asked how it happened and whether the guy had any protective spells. Razel grinned and said she could check his magic circle, and Mercy frowned, then suddenly realized something and screamed. Claiming her target designation was lost, she shouted that it was unfair. Razel replied with an awkward smile that the magic can easily change the target. The man laughed and said it was unsuitable for fighting people because anyone could become the target. Mercia grabbed her head in anger and shouted that it looked like she had rushed into such a big move and made a mistake. Razel added that forging a magic circle against the hero is impossible, so it is quite effective, and the girl calmed down a little. Razel moved toward her, and said that waiting to attack with quickly activated magic while preparing slower magic behind the scenes would lead to his defeat, and from a strategic point of view, it was almost ideal. Smiling, the man said the girl would win if she stayed careful, praised Mercia for doing well this time, and the girl agreed with him happily. The Princess of Darkness smiled widely and said she would do her best, then slammed her fist into the man's fist. Mercia decided to have a snack, then turned to the man and said she liked the workout itself, which surprised him. So he asked if it was true, and she confirmed. She said it motivates her to try new things, especially protective magic. Exile smiled and said he was pleased to hear that. The man said he was worried she might burn out when she reached her goal. Mercia said she hadn't known he was worried. The Princess of Darkness joyfully promised to be Exil's friend and said she was a person of her word. The man agreed, thinking his former comrades were different. Exile said the sandwich was very tasty. The girl agreed happily, saying she and Jack had cooked it. The man was shocked that a demon could cook. Mercia said he was one of the best in the castle. Exile replied that he understood, thinking appearances can be deceptive. Mercia stretched wearily, and Exile said it was over and they were going home now. A huge shadow fell over the man and the woman, making them look up in confusion. They saw a huge mouth and eyes as the dragon angrily demanded whether they were really disturbing his sleep. The Princess of Darkness stared at the creature in shock and shouted that it was a dragon, while Exile, confused, asked whether the girl knew what dragons were like. Mercia, displeased, asked the guy if he was a fool. She replied that of course this was not the case. She said she had never even seen him in the flesh. The guy awkwardly replied that that was how it turned out. Mercia said the dragon looked very much like the dragons from the legends. The guy asked her about the legends. Speaking seriously, the princess began to say that about 10,000 years ago the civilization that lived here was destroyed by a dragon. She said the people lucky enough to survive the dragon's storm restored peace and are still his descendants today. And the girl added, "This is true as long as they do not disturb the dragon's sleep." Mercia said the dragon's name was the sleeping dragon of antiquity. The dark princess looked at the dragon and warned that they had awakened something terrible. Exile sighed thoughtfully after she spoke. The man replied seriously that it was a bad idea and said he did not want to be woken, shocking the girl. Exile eagerly asked what could hit the dragon with it again to make it fall asleep, and Mercy asked if the guy was stupid and said maybe they were not joking. But at that moment a dragon growled menacingly and interrupted them. Grudgingly, the dragon asked the couple what they were whispering, called them little demons, and warned that just looking at it was disrespectful to him. Unaware, he shouted that they would regret their influence. The dragon began gathering energy for a powerful attack. Remembering Exile's words, Mercia immediately activated the absorption barrier as the dragon launched a swift attack. The smoke cleared and the dark princess, surprised, said that it was working. The dragon stood stunned by what had just happened. Exile smiled at the girl and said she had already surpassed the dragon's strength. Mercia looked at her hands in shock and asked if it was really her. Exile said he was sure Mercia could kill a dragon like that in an instant. The girl insisted she could slay a sleeping dragon with her bare hands. The dragon said they had stopped the attack only by a ridiculous accident. Article 10, Paragraph 3 of the Pact of Man and the Beast says that if a sleeping dragon awakens, the heroes of the human race must slay the dragon. Paragraph 4 says that if Paragraph 3 is carried out, the demon tribe will be handed over to the human tribe no more than at any other time. The princess laughed aloud, her face cruel, and said that if they defeated him, the terrible contract would finally be annulled, while the girl said she would take his body with her, laughed again, and said she now looked very much like a demon lord. He grinned at the girl and told Mercier to keep going, saying this alone would not be enough to prepare her to be a hero, but it was her unforgettable first battle and he was proud of her. The girl grinned, then said her first battle would be with a real dragon and that no one would believe her. The dragon, furious at their arrogance, said they were just small pawns. The monster stood up and roared that he would burn them all to the ground. Mercia grinned and declared she would end this dragon for the future of demons. Arms spread wide, she smiled broadly as huge spikes rose around her, met the monster's cold stare, and summoned a magic spear. The dragon refused to stop, gathering a concentrated blast of fiery power in his mouth to kill them. and said briefly that they had brought all his anger on themselves. He instantly unleashed his full power on the people trying to kill him. Mercia kept up her attack aimed directly at the dragon, and a massive explosion rocked the area, blocking all visibility. After the smoke and dust finally settled, the dragon's legs came into view, and moments later he collapsed to the ground with no strength left. The girl stared at the monster's body and looked around in disbelief, then asked whether it was really over and whether she had won. Roselle let out a nervous laugh of surprise, realizing Mercy's skills had improved far faster than he'd imagined, and that the dragon itself was very weak. At the same time, Mercia walked up to the monster's body and said they just needed to kill her in case she woke up again. Razor watched the girl and couldn't help but admire her courage. Stepping closer, he looked at Mercia and asked what she planned to do with the dragon's body. Mercia said loudly that they planned to use her as a bargaining chip in negotiations with people. Mercia crouched slightly to examine the dragon's body and wondered whether that would be enough to convince them the dragon had died at their hands. She asked Rysel his thoughts on using it to make magic tools, added that the dragon's material from a creature that had lived tens of thousands of years would not be wasted, then asked whether that was true, and Rysel reflected on her words about the material. He suddenly gasped and said he remembered everything and realized it was true. Mercy turned to him and asked what had happened, and he grinned as if he had known all along and said everything was fine. Mercia brightened, looked at him, and asked him to tell her what it was right away. Roselle smiled warmly and told her not to be in such a hurry. He said he would need her help and would therefore tell her everything, then began his short story. After a while, night had fallen and the moon had risen, and the Demon King's castle became quite noisy. She looked at the object in surprise and asked whether it was really a gift, saying it was lovely, but that she could not understand why they had suddenly decided to give it to her. And Mercier said proudly that she should accept the gift first and then speak. Rysel gave an awkward sigh and agreed. Then a weapon neatly appeared in the air. She looked at it admiringly and asked what it was, and Rysel said it was a magic sword made from materials taken from the sleeping dragon. He explained that when she channels magic into the sword, it forms a lasting magic circle that activates, and it is charged with mercy magic circles so only blood relatives can use it. In other words, this sword is a unique weapon that only she can use. The girl jumped up from her seat and said she could not accept something so valuable, adding that she could not handle such power on her own. Mercia paused, breathed deeply, and said her sister's name. Her expression was very serious as she spoke to the younger sister. Smiling warmly at her sister, she said that even if she defeated the current heroes, there was no guarantee a second or third hero would not appear. Shishiel stared at her sister in silence. After a short pause, she hesitated and asked if she would really defeat other heroes instead of Mercia. At that moment, she felt a little insecure and realized she would have to fight when Mercia was not around. Gripping her weapon tightly, she looked ahead with steady confidence, knowing she had to make decisions. The girl said she understood and would be very grateful to them. She smiled and said she wasn't very good at using it anyway. She added she would put the sword in the magic vault. Roselle smiled and said he hadn't killed the dragon this time. Shishiel was stunned and asked what it meant. Immediately she understood everything and looked at her sister to confirm her guess. Mercy smiled proudly and said it was exactly like that. Mercy was the one who killed the sleeping dragon. Shishiel gasped with admiration and said it was simply wonderful, feeling even more proud. Mercy shook her head and said it was exactly like that. At that moment of glory, Rysel quietly said the princess had been scared from the start. The girl turned angrily and said she had heard everything clearly. Staring at the men, she asked in disbelief whether all the dragon material had gone into the sword, and then waited for an answer. Lee said, with Mercy's permission, that they still had some surplus, so they would have a big feast soon. Shishiel reacted immediately, calling a dragon meat banquet too extravagant, but she still looked very happy. Mercy shook her head and suggested the boys invite the castle servants to join the feast. Shishiel smiled and said the castle staff would help them cook the dragon meat. Mercy said they should leave the butchering to Risola. Roselle said calmly he would make sure everything was cooked perfectly. After some preparation, many people gathered in a building with extremely high ceilings and stood around talking by a table of assorted food in the center of the room. She said they would all eat dragon meat, added she never thought she'd live to see such a day, and Mercier said she couldn't believe it, even though the meat tasted great. Exile said active dragons usually have tough meat, but after many years of sleep it becomes tender and delicious. Mercia said that after finishing her training she was able to kill a dragon and now has a short period of peace. Nothing has been decided yet because nothing has really started. Determined, she said she would do everything she could to make this peace last forever. The girl looked up and said the real battle would begin soon. She asked whether that was true. Exile confirmed this and said dragons could never match the power of fusion heroes. He sounded very serious. Mercier said she knew it well, since a repulsive goddess stands behind every lineup of heroes, a woman who has been manipulating people from behind the scenes for thousands of years, and no one knows what she might do if she realizes she is starting to lose. Shishiel looked ahead and said they must stay in order and control themselves. Exile closed his eyes and agreed she was absolutely right. The girl smiled at the guys and said she truly believes the two of them can handle whatever comes next. Mercia smiled and said that once the battle was finally over, she would leave this world and break the peace treaty with the Shishiel people, and the girl should not compromise with them at all. Smiling terribly, she said they could leave it to her, because every day she rehearses in her head how she will hunt the human race, and she wondered what would happen if she could not control her power. Exile and Mercia felt a sudden, deep fear as they watched Shishiel's reaction. The Dark Princess, sweating with tension, said she was counting on her sister in this matter. Noise still filled the Demon King's castle because the feast had drawn so many demons who were simply enjoying themselves. Mercia sank onto the sofa smiling and said she simply couldn't eat any more of what she'd already had. Exile said he found it hard to believe she was a demon lord, and laughed. Mercy rolled over and said it was because she had already eaten and was full, then ran to her sister and called her very sloppy. Suddenly, Exile and Mercia felt something bother them and froze, listening to what had just happened. Exile turned aside and asked the girls if they had noticed what had happened. Mercius replied that was exactly what happened. The girl said dryly that there were 3 men at the main gate. The group began discussing and asked if anyone had ideas about who these men might be. Exile said their combat strength was hard to gauge, but he was almost certain who they were. He realized they were called heroes. At that moment, the civil servant Fraud, the adventurer Real, and the mercenary Banzo stood at the gate, all looking a little tense. Fraud smiled easily and said it turned out to be the Demon Lord's castle. Banza tensed, and Real smiled and said he was a little disappointed they had arrived so quickly since the trip had lasted only a few months. Adventurer. Real flexed his arms and, smiling widely, said their target was the Demon Lord and he would show him everything. Banda panicked and told the hero to wait a moment. He took a deep breath, felt that everything was wrong, and realized his earlier rash words had achieved nothing. Real stepped out to the castle gate and shouted to the demons to bring their lord here at once. He was completely serious. The guards drew their swords and demanded to know what was happening and who the orcs were. They said these people would never enter the castle. Real was genuinely offended by being called an orc. Clenching his fist, Real demanded to know what the demon had just said. The angry Real flexed his arms and said this guard looked like he wanted to be beaten, then demanded one last time that the demon bring his master to them. The guard stood his ground and said firmly he would defend the gate, even if it cost him his life. She looked at this with concern and said the situation must be very bad. Exile said it might be time for them to go outside. Mercia took a deep breath and said they would have to go out. Exile said that if you think that way, he would have been dead long ago, but he still looks the same. Mercy said Exile might have disguised himself. The man thought about it, and then said, maybe he really should have done that. The hero took a fighting stance to face the demon. The guard stepped forward with his weapon, ready to fight at any moment. Real screamed, and the guard echoed her, pushing the hero to attack him. They rushed at each other the next moment, but just before their guns met, a loud explosion sounded, startling them both and pausing the fight. Real jumped back and asked what had happened, while Fraud and Banza ran to the adventurers to check if he was okay, clearly nervous. Right then, a huge magical cocoon hovered in front of the guard and the heroes. The guard, wary, said it was magic. The cocoon opened, and 2 figures stepped out. Mercier fixed them with a cruel stare and asked the uninvited guests whether they knew where they were at that moment. Real glanced to the side with slight surprise and said the Lord had appeared, while Bands quietly added that the hero's step could easily destroy them. The knights guarding the Lord's castle bowed to Mercia and apologized. He assured the girl they would gather the soldiers and destroy them at once. Mercia told the knights not to worry. The Princess of Darkness looked at the uninvited guests and said she wanted to speak with them. Vanzo wasn't sure they could handle the conversation, so he suggested they might at least get some information from the guests. Real, displeased, asked the princess how she dared speak to them that way, but Bonza stopped him and told him to wait. The hero said excitedly that he had an idea and asked for a minute. Real was slightly taken aback. Bonza turned to Mercia, said they were not from this world, and apologized for their rude behavior. The hero said she seemed to be an important person among the demons, and that he had one question he really wanted to ask her. Bonza admitted in despair that he knew it was impolite, but still asked the girl to hear him out. Real asked skeptically if this was really their plan, and Fraud agreed doubtfully, saying the hero is a good schemer, so they should leave it to him for now. Mercia used telekinesis and, annoyed, told Rizal they had entered the castle, clashed, and still wanted to talk. Rizal saw how it was now with all the summoned heroes, and Mercia said she was very sorry he had to face them. At that moment, the hero pulled Rizal and Mercia out of the conversation, gave a brief summary of the brave man, and asked whether those words meant anything to the demons. This greatly surprised the couple. The girl asked gloomily if they really knew those words. Bonza, shocked, asked her in return if she knew them too. The Princess of Darkness looked at Razel and asked what to do next. Razel said he would leave the decision to the girl, and she said she understood everything. Mercy turned and walked away, saying they were moving out and telling them to start preparing. Razel nodded in agreement, and Banza watched them in surprise. Real and Fraud approached Hatsa and began asking what was going on, with Real demanding an explanation for why it was necessary, and Banza repeating the words, worried but insisting everything was fine. At that moment, a huge seal appeared above the assembled heroes, startling them. Real spun around in a panic and demanded to know what was happening. Fraud said he had never seen such a large, complex magic circle. Real snapped that now was not the time for such conversations. Bonza watched them in silence. The heroes began cursing loudly, saying they had been tricked and insisting the demons would never admit it, while the bands stared in shock and were convinced they had been deceived. The men shouted as the light above them grew larger. The girl then turned to the summoned heroes and told them to raise their heads. The heroes froze, staring at the girl before them with confusion on their faces. Mercy smiled and told the guests that the summoned heroes were in the Demon Lord's audience hall. A girl appeared before them and said confidently that she was the Lord of Demons, with Razel standing obediently beside her. Bonza was shocked to find them in the audience hall. Fraud could not believe she had moved them all. Rial, stunned, asked whether it was the Demon Lord. The Princess of Darkness spoke smugly to the summoned heroes, promising to teach the world's truths, and saying they could ask anything. Bonza immediately asked the bishop to explain what heroic synthesis is and why they had been called. The Demon Lord explained that, like the dozens of heroes summoned before, they should be merged into a single hero to act as a power source, and that this composite hero would be humanity's main weapon and the demon race's sworn enemy. Bonzo was shocked to say the words he knew. At that moment, another hero began shouting that they had been deceived. Real began shouting about the evidence. She told him to provide convincing proof that this was a conspiracy by the king. Fraud tried to calm the man down. Seated on her throne, Mercia said she understood his distrust but told him to be patient because of his short temper, leaving Bonza confused. Razel looked at them and said they had not seen each other for a long time. Real asked cautiously who he was, and the man replied that, as they could see, they would not recognize him in this form, and his disguise began to fade gradually. Razel appeared before them and asked how the heroes felt. The guy said he wanted them to see something. Banza, surprised, said it was the same guy. Real was shocked, and Fraud said he should be dead. Suspicious, Razel, while making something, asked the hero why he couldn't make sure for himself that it wasn't a trick. and a small camera appeared in the hero's hands. Bonza stared at the image in surprise and asked if it was really the king's office. Fraud marveled at the picture's accuracy and called the technology impressive. Reol, confused, wondered how the man had learned about the place. They studied the picture and asked who the man in front of the king was. The hero realized he had never seen him in the palace. Mercy smiled and said it was convenient. The demon lord declared this a synthetic hero, the product of their labors. Fraud sneered that he was just an ordinary person no matter how they looked at him. He believed the girl might fool those two, but not him. A man pointed at the screen and asked if they could read the numbers on the video. The heroes asked what it meant. Exile said it was his first measured combat value since arriving in this world. Fraud was shocked and asked how a hero could be summoned with such power, and if that number resulted from bringing together all the heroes summoned before. The Princess of Darkness said they had been summoning heroes from the start, but those heroes only became food for the monster. Bonza replied in shock that it was impossible. He asked whether that meant they could no longer return to their world. Tears filled Fraud's eyes as he could not believe he would never see his family again. The hero asked what they should do. Reol swore heavily and asked how this could be possible. Mercy looked at them and said seriously that the demons had been oppressed by humans for many years because of their strength and numbers, and that was the truth of the world. Angry, the girl began to speak about years of oppression and the harm they had done to their friends, their people, and their homeland. She said she would never forgive the human race. Desperate, Bonds fell to his knees and begged the girl for at least some help. The hero shouted he would take any job and did not care if it was a chore or a menial task, promising to do whatever they ordered. The demon lord looked at the group and said, she wondered what the other summoned heroes thought of her. Fraud fell silent, and the real one looked displeased. The next moment Fraud bowed and agreed to this. Rael called out to the hero in surprise, and the hero apologized, saying he wanted to go home at any cost. Rael clenched his teeth and bowed to the girl, while Bonza turned to the demon lord, pleaded with her to pity them as poor fools, and asked the girl to save them. Mercia looked at them and smiled broadly. Then she told the heroes she was giving them their first order. The demon lord told the summoned heroes that the three of them must die, and they looked up at her in shock. Meanwhile, reports reached the kingdom that a group of adventurers sent into demon territory had sparked an internal conflict that led to the demons' deaths. Given the demons' past behavior, people said the demons would accuse the adventurers of murder. The report said this amounted to negligence causing death, and the minimum penalty is 1 year in prison. Frowning at the report in his hands, the king said it was fair. He was relieved they hadn't begun whining or demanding a trial. The king said it wasn't easy to deal with accusations from cursed demons. At that moment, a ring lit up above his head. A sudden movement overhead made the man look up, and he cursed and screamed, then fell to the floor clutching his head and asked what had happened and what had fallen, and froze in shock when he looked closer. Bodies lay on the floor before the king. A man whose face showed horror began stuttering and shouting that they were corpses. The king noticed holes in their bellies and was too shocked to ask why they were in his office, and a moment later he began to lose consciousness, calling it a nightmare. A few hours ago, the summoned heroes gathered in the demon lord's castle, where the Princess of Darkness issued her first order that the heroes should die for her. The summoned heroes looked shocked and asked whether the girl had really deceived them after all, and Bonza asked what that meant. Mercier met their eyes and said she was only telling the truth. Razel, a little excited, turned to the girl and asked if he could stop torturing him already. She mumbled something thoughtfully. The Princess of Darkness laughed loudly and agreed with the man, saying she had already seen the silly faces of their summoned heroes, and Riel asked in surprise what had just happened. Riel frowned and asked the girl whether she was treating them like a joke. Razel noticed she had offended him, and Mercia smiled and apologized, saying she was only amused. Bonza called to the hero with excitement. Raol said he was definitely not one of the smart people who do things first and do things later, and asked the girl to explain it so even he could understand. Mercy looked at the hero in surprise and told him not to put himself down so much, saying she liked honest people like him. The Princess of Darkness turned to Razel and asked him to explain it to the others. The man agreed with her. Razel said the heroes had been told he was dead, and asked them to explain how he had fooled his pursuers and the kings. Fraud guessed it was some kind of magic. Bonza said Exile had tricked them into believing he was dead. Real said Exile would run as hard as he could. Risal admitted he had disguised the body. The heroes were surprised by his answer. They said it did not sound good. Fraud said he understood what the man meant. Real asked in confusion what it meant. Fraud said it meant the man had a second body. Banza concluded the man had committed murder. Exile spoke up, denying he had killed anyone in this world. Claiming he had prepared his own corpse, he drew a laugh from Mercia. When she still did not believe him, he complained that she was not laughing. Fraud sighed, doubting the man really meant he had another body. Bonza said he thought it was nonsense. Real, horrified, said he did not like ghosts or the like and asked for a break. Exile used multi-purpose stem cells to clone himself. It was the same magic Frode used and the same method behind cloning the Foucault boy. Cloning technology exists in his world but is not yet practical, so it made sense for Exile to use it. Real believed that if you died in battle, you would move into another body, excitedly saying that even a clone would still mean he was alive, asking whether that was true, and then saying he did not like it. Fraud said cloning was plainly unethical. Bonza asked about the general ethical implications of cloning. Riola felt uneasy at the thought of his copy standing beside him. Razel, confused, said their functions were greatly reduced. At that moment, the man shouted briefly to summarize, and the others were frightened by the noise. Exile said they should use clones this time, adding that he did not care what the others thought and would carry out his mission. Mercia intervened and awkwardly asked whether they needed the man's consent to do that. The cloning magic was advanced. The bodies looked real and amazed. The heroes, Exile said the life support functions had been cut, and the man said he was using the clones' corpses to fake their deaths. Fraud asked what the man would do with the staged corpses, since it was too dangerous to leave them on human territory. Bonza added that if left in a deserted place, the corpses would rot and become unrecognizable. Exile agreed but said he had an effective solution. Exile told the heroes he would send the body directly to the king's office, and Mercia said she would attach a sealed letter to it using her magic. Sometime later, in the king's chambers, someone hesitantly tried to wake his majesty. The man frowned and mumbled something. Regis excitedly told the king he was awake. The king called to him, and a servant said he had suddenly heard screams, ran to check, and found a man surrounded by corpses. Exhausted, the king confirmed the corpses were there. Suddenly opening his eyes, he asked what kind of corpses they were. Regis said he had confirmed those were the 3 summoned heroes he had sent to the demon lord's castle, and the king said he understood, declared the lord had finally crossed the line and wondered whether it was too soon to return the bodies, while Regis hesitated and tried to add something. The servant handed the small device to the king and said he thought the king would find the answer in it. Frowning, the man asked what kind of device it was. Regius said it had been left beside the corpse with the letter and looked like a device for transferring summoned heroes. The servant said its range was 20,000 kilometers. The king said the demon king's castle is 4,000 kilometers away, but he still did not believe such a device. The king cursed the demons for capturing a respected sage, saying they could not have built such a strange device without him. A man asked Regis what the letter said, and the servant handed it to the king immediately. The letter said it was the season for eating from pots, so they prepared the donated summoned heroes and sent them back. The girl said they had taken care of the sleeping ancient dragon and wanted to cancel the contract. The food trade was canceled, and the hero's arrival amounted to a declaration of war. Angered after reading the letter he had left, the king crushed it, called it brazen, raged about renegotiating the treaties, and asked Fladialka to explain its meaning, while Regis urgently told the king to calm down, warning him it was bad for his health. The king suspected they planned to make false accusations and swiftly overthrow the kingdom. The man silently cursed the girl and all her people. Regius called and ordered him to tell the synthetic heroes to prepare for the campaign, then told the servant to return them to the demon lord with the message that they would crush and burn their lands. Regius shuddered and, addressing the king with respect, said the demon's recent movements were suspicious. He added that it would be better to send scouts first to check on them. The king looked at the servant with displeasure, asking whether Regis was really challenging him. The man asked the servant whether he wanted the king to execute him. Regis sighed in fright and told the king he would do as he wished. The king cursed the demon lord in his head, certain the lord had forgotten his place, and decided to use the newly created heroes to remind him. Loud laughter echoed through the castle, wrapped in the darkness of night. The king decided it was time to put a stop to it. Laughing, the Princess of Darkness talked about them watching it, and said happily that the king had fallen for her tricks, then went quiet, and, in a false voice, declared that this was what the demon lord looks like. And Banza replied, confused, that she was no different from any other little girl. Razel said the king would never obey orders, but if it was framed as an insult to his character or honor, everything would be different. Mercia smiled and said she did not think a man would fall for it so easily. Then she laughed. The demon lord sighed with satisfaction and said she had clicked the right spot. Razel smiled and exhaled, saying the girl had finally done it. The man said he would be there soon. Riol said he did not know what to do now that they had shown him everything. Fraud said awkwardly that he was ashamed of what he was doing. Banzo said he had not noticed it before. Apparently, this was because they were kept in luxury. Mercia was glad they caught the guys before they were synthesized. Riol said it didn't sound right. Fraud agreed, saying it was nothing compared to cloning. Banza has been on edge ever since he heard that. Razel turned to the guy and noticed they were too relaxed. Someone knocked on the door. Razel looked up and wondered who it was. A man said he had brought them a teleportation grim war. Razel agreed and accepted it. The servant told them they had also received a letter. Mercia welcomed him and thanked the servant for his hard work. The girl smiled and said she would count on him if anything else came up. The servant agreed and quickly left the room. Curious about the letter's contents, the Princess of Darkness opened it, read it carefully, and said she understood everything. Razel asked what was going on with the king and if they had gotten what they wanted. The girl smiled and said it was great. Mercia said that a month later, in the western desert of Manaris, the king sent the synthesized Hera to pacify the demon lord for violating Article 7.3 of the contract between humans and demons. Riel said this meant the war had finally begun. Prad said he had never been so nervous. Banza said he had never fought anyone much stronger than him. The demon lord stared at them and asked what they were talking about. Rizel said he would not touch them this time. Riol, Fraud, and Banza stared at the couple before them, clearly puzzled by the information. Razel said only a small number will take part in this war, that the goal of the human race is to demonstrate the overwhelming power of synthetic heroes, defeat the demon lord, and take control of the demons, and that the chance of a surprise attack is extremely low. Mercia talked about how she would exploit it. Her plan was to strike back at the synthetic heroes, humanity's main weapon, and crush their arrogance. The summoned heroes stared at the girl in disbelief, insisting this could not be true and trying to figure out what she meant. The demon lord declared confidently that she and the synthetic heroes would fight alone. In the demon lord's castle, Raisel sighed and said that for now everything would stay the same. A disheveled Banza spotted Ryle and wished him good morning. The hero asked Ryle what he was doing here. Ryle replied he was preparing for a decisive battle. Ryle assumed the hero was out for a morning walk. Banzo replied that he was warming up. He glanced up at the strange device and asked whether the man was using it to prepare. Rysel said it was an artifact that broadcasts an image. The man said he had installed them all over the territory, including inside the castle. The hero was shocked that the stones were installed across the entire territory and asked the man if he really had that many magic stones. Banza hoped one would not be needed for every device. Razel said he did not have enough, but Fraud shared some of his because he can use storage magic. Banzo realized the final battle's date had been set yesterday. He was amazed the man had created so many artifacts in a single day, and concluded the man was definitely more dangerous than the Princess of Darkness. The hero asked Riza why he was posting them at all. Riza said he wanted everyone to see the battle between the Princes of Darkness and the hero. Banza asked why the man needed it. Razel said it would make everyone see the girl's strength and be too afraid to touch even a finger, even after the princess was gone. The hero was puzzled by the man's reply and asked why she would not be there. The man assumed the Dark Princess planned to leave. Razel smiled and said he wanted to bring her into his world and that someone should get what he deserved. Banzo was stunned and thought there might be a world where a man could not be defeated by Razel, and he realized their summoned heroes could not even scratch him. The hero looked at the man in front of him, glad they had not fought, offered his help, and Razel thanked him. After a while, the girl began counting, speaking directly into the microphone to check the sound. People gathered at the noise, curious what was happening, and soon recognized Seren by her voice, as Zarina addressed the assembled demons, thanked them for waiting, and said the decisive battle between the hero and the Princess of Darkness is about to begin. The demoness on the screen pointed out the large army gathered against them that day, smiled, and said she was Zarina from the Princess of Darkness's guard and would comment. Raisal scanned the gathered soldiers and said there were fewer than he expected. Mercy said they probably assumed demons were weak. The Princess of Darkness said they needed to be put in their place this time. By then, someone stepped forward and said the demons were showing off and could fly, and he noted with displeasure that there were only 2 of them and that they had underestimated them. A man in armor stepped forward and greeted Mercia, saying they had not seen each other for a long time and that the Princess of Darkness had become a beautiful woman. Mercy said, "Compliments from someone who cannot remember her name are meaningless," the girl added. She could not see the goddess anywhere, and the man laughed that this was natural because the goddess would not come and neither of them would have sufficed. Only he would have. The Princess of Darkness asked Razel telepathically if there were any signs of the goddess nearby, and he said there were, but she was not in combat mode, so he guessed she was just watching to avoid getting bored, and the girl said she understood, which meant the goddess would not help them. Razel considered that the goddess would not attack and reached some conclusions. He suddenly said he remembered something important and would have to leave the girl here alone, confident she could manage, and admitted how forgetful he was, and Mercy asked, amused, whether he was up to something again. Mercia sighed in annoyance, smiled, and said that even if she asked him to stay, he would still leave, then asked if that was true and told him to just go. The Princess of Darkness relaxed and said she would be finished here by the time the guy returned, and Razel vanished into the air, looked at the girl and replied with a smile that he would be only glad. At that moment, the hero called to the girl and, smiling, asked whether she was really going to fight alone and whether the entire demon race might help her, saying that only then would she have a chance. Mercy just looked at him in silence. The Dark Princess let out a small laugh, and when she laughed out loud, the hero, puzzled, asked what had happened because he could not see what was funny. Mercy smiled and said she could finally see the difference in their strength, that she couldn't believe she'd once been afraid of someone so weak, then looked at the guy gloomily and called it comical. Clearly displeased, the hero said he was really a weakling and asked whether the girl was talking about him. The mood around him shifted as he faced the knight, said he could handle it alone, told them not to climb, and the knight quickly agreed. Dark energy quickly enveloped the Princess of Darkness, and she sneered that the hero was foolish to fall for such a simple provocation. Mercia waved her hand and shouted that the hero would die today, and the determined man charged into battle. Swinging his sword with casual confidence, the hero sent an attack through the air and said he would finish it in 10 seconds. Mercia easily blocked the hero's attack with her shield, then raised her head to the sky as clouds gathered and lightning began to strike. In the next instant, a bolt of lightning struck the ground at his feet, hitting the hero and making him scream. Blood dripped onto the ground. The hero glared at the girl and cursed. Mercy watched him bored and asked if he was still standing. The Princess of Darkness left, saying such a wound could not heal right away. The hero sighed in pain again. Smiling, the hero said he could easily heal the wound, but he ran out of time and the girl stepped forward. Numerous explosions sounded above the man's head, drawing his attention. Mercia snapped her fingers as the man grinned and said the girl was scaring him with firecrackers, but at that moment a sudden attack struck him, catching him off guard. Blood gushed from the hero's mouth. He noticed how fast it was. The girl conjured immediately. Mercia smiled and called the man a fool. The Princess of Darkness aimed her energy at the man. The hero smiled and thanked her for letting him heal his wounds. About to say what he'd do next, he froze as the girl's energy wrapped around him. Mercy's power began spreading rapidly through the man's wound. He asked in shock what was happening. Mercy said calmly that this must be it, and she thought that would be enough. Looking down at the wounded hero, the Princess of Darkness said she was simply stronger than him and that it was over. Exhausted, the hero staggered back. A man said it would end like this. The hero fell to the ground, and his body began to disperse, leaving behind only a skeleton. Mercy watched without emotion and stayed silent. After a moment, she said it was boring. A knight from the hero's army approached the man's body in shock, saying it could not be him, and hesitated to call out to the hero, but the hero did not answer. Zarina looked at it and shouted with delight about the recent events, and the demoness said the hero got such a stupid ending. Zarina shouted them this was a certain victory for the Princess of Darkness, and others shouted their support for the girl. The demoness announced that their broadcast was ending, then congratulated the Princess of Darkness before it ended. Mercia quickly turned to the man and asked if he had seen everything, and the girl added that she had finished quickly. Razel smiled and agreed it had been a wonderful battle, and the man said he had finished his business too. Mercia grinned and asked Razel what he was doing there. He replied with a sweet smile that he had done nothing wrong and that he had just stolen an artifact of the heroes. Mercia sighed in surprise. Surprised, she asked whether it was the same artifact, and the man confirmed it, smiling as he said, "You can't just leave him." Mercia asked with great interest whether she could try using it now. Razel removed his disguise and told her to wait until the audience left. Razel looked up and confidently addressed God, saying God was watching, then shouted that he had taken the hero's artifact and demanded God show himself, but there was no response to his shout. Razel glanced around as the Princess of Darkness explained how the provocation had succeeded. God did not appear to them. Mercia angrily complained about how high the fee was. The man closed his eyes, smiled, said it was fine, and added that he would soon arrange a situation so he could appear. With great enthusiasm, Mercy asked Razel if he would do it right now. Razel turned, smiled, and said yes. The man said he would begin an experiment to synthesize him, and the hero was determined. Mercia smiled and said that even if she asked him to stay, he would still leave. She then asked if that was true and said he simply had to go. The girl said she would be finished here by the time he returned. Razor replied she would be very glad to. When he left, he thought that, given her abilities, the girl would be able to cope here without him. He figured that with security weakened, he could now steal the hero's synthesizer. Razel studied the map carefully and concluded from the image that the device was somewhere here. After some time, the man entered a closed room, looked around and saw that no one was there. Razel looked at the device in the center, scanned the room, found no traps, and grabbed the device, thinking they had underestimated him. Razel looked at the device in his hands in silence, thinking no one would come. Nothing else happened. He was very unhappy that he had gotten it so easily. He relaxed when he realized he would have more free time. Then something caught his eye and surprised him. A smile crossed his face as he imagined what would happen if he used the device. After that, the man returned to the Princess of Darkness, who watched the stricken hero and wondered if she had already finished. Mercia asked Razel if he had seen everything, then said she had finished quickly. Razel agreed, calling it a great battle, and said he had finished his business too. Mercia asked what the man had been doing, and Razel said he had done nothing wrong, and had only stolen one of the hero's artifacts. The Princess of Darkness reacted in shock, saying it was the same artifact. The man confirmed they could not just leave him like that. The girl said eagerly. She wanted to try using it now, and Razel smiled and told her to wait because the audience was still watching. At that moment, Razel turned to God and said he knew what he was seeing. Having taken the hero's artifact, he demanded that God reveal himself at once. Mercia said in confusion that God was not showing himself, and the man replied that the provocation had not worked, but that was fine because he would soon create a situation where God would appear, and the woman eagerly asked if he would do it right away. Razel confidently said he would start an experiment to synthesize him and the hero. Mercia was confused because the experiment wasn't about her but about a man, so she clarified it. Razel said the artifact likely drains one person's magic and boosts another's, increasing the total supply, and Mercia listened closely, then suggested it might be better to use it on her rather than on the man. With surprise on his face, the man asked Mercy if she really hadn't noticed. Mercy just looked at him in disbelief. Razel said that based on magical power, the girl was stronger than him. Mercy was confused because she could not believe she was stronger than the guy. Razel said the girl was strong and would grow stronger, which means she has to. He reminded her he had said she needed a comrade to fight at her side. Mercia thoughtfully repeated that the man was her friend. He said he wasn't joking and didn't want her to be weaker than him, and that he couldn't afford to be so weak he'd be no good. Mercia agreed, understanding. Razel added that the device had another secret. The girl was surprised, and the man said he must have something to do with the goddess. Mercia, shocked, asked what would happen if the goddess suddenly took over the man's mind, and Razel replied that if he took advantage of it, it might be true, but the man was well versed in mind control magic and confident he could resist. The princess was upset that even after he said he did not agree, the man went ahead anyway, and Razel said he really wanted to try it. Razel said with interest that he'd have to try it to know if it would work. Mercy frowned and said he had no sense of self-preservation at all. The man said excitedly it was time for them to try. The woman thought that if she had agreed happily now, he would have died of joy. Razel raised the device before him and said they could begin. At that moment, the deceased hero's body was enveloped in power. Holding the device, the man felt the energy begin to penetrate him and was very surprised. Mercia stood beside him, shielding her eyes with her hand from the bright light coming from the man. Razel closed his eyes, sure the launch had no problems and that no one was trying to control him. The Princess of Darkness asked anxiously how the process was going. Razel said the magic power was off the scale, but everything appeared under control. The man smiled broadly at the woman and said their experiment was a success. Mercia looked at the man with the light and then shouted with joy, thinking it was impossible. Razel noticed something and both turned to look. A man stood in front of them, so Razel asked whether he was the army commander. The girl said he looked like it, and the man said he was not. The commander was shocked and asked where the couple had gotten it. Razel and Mercia smiled contentedly. One of them said he had stolen it and called the man a fool. The commander could not believe it because they had hidden the device deep in the capital. Mercia landed near the man and told him to take a scroll to the king rather than show anger, and when he asked what it was, the girl said it was a document on the surrender of mankind. The commander, with tears in his eyes, said that if he brought it to the king, he would be finished off or tortured, and execution would be salvation. The princess asked if he was really so afraid of the king, saying she could cut off his head right now and send his head and other parts to the capital along with the hero's corpse. And the man said in horror that he understood everything. The man ran off screaming while the girl shouted after him not to worry because they would reach the capital before his execution and get him out. And the commander agreed, saying they would definitely come. The soldiers looked at the commander in confusion, asking what had happened there. The commander said they were retreating and told me not to ask unnecessary questions. Razel asked Mercia whether the man could deliver it. Mercia said she was sure he could handle it. The girl noticed the commander watching her. His eyes begged them to save him, or his ghost would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Princess of Darkness gave an awkward wave and laughed, claiming she knew everything and that nothing could be done. Razel agreed they needed time. Mercia looked at the retreating army and asked if it was worth teleporting them away. Razel raised his hand and examined it. Excited, he told Mercia he wanted to try something new with his magic. Mercia looked back, murmured thoughtfully, and said she understood what he wanted. Razel smiled at the offended girl and asked what was wrong and whether she was in a bad mood, while Mercia, twirling her hair around her finger, told him it was because he was the only one who got something new and insisted she was the one who had defeated the hero. The man looked at the Princess of Darkness eagerly, raised a finger, and told her not to worry because he had a secret plan just for her, and Mercia covered her mouth in shock and gasped at his plan. Razel turned to Mercia with a wide smile and suggested they return first to the castle of the Princess of Darkness. And the man said the words that Shishiel and the others had been waiting to hear for a long time. So Mercia agreed happily, thinking of her subjects and saying she could not wait to see their surprised faces. After the conversation, the man and woman set off together. They returned home, where Mercia walked happily ahead of the man. Razel pointed to the side in surprise, and the woman looked in the same direction, surprised. All the maids and knights of the Princess of Darkness assembled in the Demon Lord's palace courtyard, neatly lined up in several rows as they waited for the girl, and Shishielan's arena stood at the front watching for Mercia. Mercia saw her gathered subjects and ran toward them with a joyful smile. Exile stood quietly behind her, closed his eyes, and gave a small smile. The Princess of Darkness ran up to her little sister Shishiel, with tears in her eyes, and hugged the sister who had returned, and both girls were happy to see each other while the same joyful servant stood behind them. Noticing Jack was missing for some reason, the Princess of Darkness looked around in disbelief, and at that moment a demon appeared not far from the two sisters hugging. Smiling, the demon held a large tray of fresh food, while the Dark Princess and her younger sister stared hungrily at the steaming dish before them. Jack glanced at the girls and laughed. The sisters watched with delight at the huge piece of meat the demon held on a tray. Exile smiled as he watched the scene. The man stood nearby watching the Princess of Darkness and her sister, and the girl waved him over to join them. After a while, the sisters went to bed and lay together. One turned to her sister and, without opening her eyes, asked hesitantly about Mercy. Looking at her sister with deep admiration, she said her sister had truly defeated the hero. Mercia opened her eyes slightly and calmly agreed. Raising her hand, she inspected it closely and said she had done it with these hands. The younger sister of the Princess of Darkness listened to Mercia in silence. Slowly, she admitted she was very scared and her hands were still shaking. Shishiel gently placed her hand over Mercia's, which surprised Mercia. She looked at her sister with concern and said the girl had protected her people and the whole country with her own hands. Her sister replied that it was the hand of a ruler they could be proud of. She added this might be only the first step, but it was a very big one. Mercia looked at her younger sister with a surprised expression as her sister repeated that this might only be the first step, but it was important. From now on, she vowed that even if the Princess of Darkness is not here, she will protect this country and the whole world. Meanwhile, Exile stood outside the door listening to the conversation between the two sisters. Some time had passed. Many demons waited for something. The Princess of Darkness stood before a large staircase, looking at it. The Princess of Darkness strode forward with brisk, confident steps past her nearby servants. Mercia stepped onto the wide balcony that became her stage. As the Princess of Darkness, she spoke loudly to her subjects and ordered them to be silent. The girl joyfully told the gathered demons the hero was no longer a threat, and they had regained their freedom. But Mercia warned this did not mean there would be no new dangers, so the Princess of Darkness said she would journey with a hero from another world, Ras Raleigh. The Princess of Darkness's subjects began whispering among themselves, full of doubt and worry. Mercia smiled, thinking it true, and knew they had every reason to be worried. The Princess of Darkness smiled and said they need not worry because she would leave someone to receive Mercia's wisdom. One girl held her hand out to the side to call her sister over, and the sister agreed confidently. Mercia said she had trusted her younger sister Shishiel with all the power while she was away. The Princess of Darkness said the girl still had much to learn, but was clearly better at politics than she was. Mercia loudly asked her subjects if there were any dissenters, and everyone remained silent. The Princess of Darkness turned to Shishiel and said it was time for her to greet everyone. Shishiel agreed modestly, then loudly ordered all the demons to listen. She said she was not as kind as her sister, and added that with Mercia away, they must work even harder at their tasks. After her short speech, Shishiel fixed her subjects with an intimidating look and asked whether they understood. The assembled demons froze in horror and hesitantly answered yes, and Mercy looked at Shishiel in shock and asked whether the girl had gone too far. Several days later, Mercy shrank and shivered from the cold and asked the man what they were going to do now and why they were in the middle of the ocean, and Exile replied that they were studying the magic of self-enhancement. Mercia wondered why they were doing this so suddenly and asked if Exile meant self-reinforcement. He told her everything was correct, then raised his hand and asked the girl to step back a little. A glowing magic circle appeared under Exile's feet and shone brightly. She watched him closely and realized he needed more time than usual. In the next moment, a brilliant flash of light appeared before the girl. Mercier stared in shock at what appeared before her. She sighed and asked what it was. A loud scream followed. A huge creature stood before the Princess of Darkness, and the girl stared in horror and asked whether it was a dragon. Mercia said in surprise that becoming a dragon was true self-empowerment, then asked, puzzled, how practical it would be to use magic with such a large body, and Razel in dragon form replied that he knew she would notice. Razel raised his finger to answer the girl in the affirmative and added that everything here was still much more interesting. Mercia, puzzled, asked what he meant by more interesting, because she did not understand him. At that moment, a very bright flash of light appeared, surprising her and making her cover her eyes with her hand. Mercy said thoughtfully that the man had returned to human form. Razel put his hand on his chest and told the girl to look more closely at his body. The girl looked suspiciously at him and questioned his claim. The girl said the magical essence had changed in quality. Mercia assumed it belonged to a dragon. The girl added that Razel was using a human form spell and could use magic to shift between dragon and human, a conclusion she reached at the same time. The man sighed with a smile and said he did not doubt Mercia, and Mercia rubbed her nose in satisfied agreement. Then Razel asked her about the advantages and disadvantages of using such magic at the same time, and Mercia felt annoyed that he was asking questions again. After thinking, she said a dragon's bulky body would make subtle magical manipulations impossible, and a human body would not allow spells as powerful as a dragon's. Then she froze in surprise and said she now understood everything. Mercia eagerly explained that Razel hadn't undone the transformation but had simply layered a human form over the dragon, so there were no drawbacks. Razel smiled and confirmed this, saying his body remained as strong as a dragon's, and his large size did not stop him from controlling magic. The girl pouted, said everything was clear, and felt reassured. She realized that to become a dragon, you first had to defeat one, something she had never considered. Mercia asked anxiously if she could handle such an advanced technique. Razel poked her nose with his finger and said in annoyance that she was saying it again. She sighed in surprise. Razel said dragons hold a vast reserve of magical power. The man could only pull it off by merging with the hero's power. He explained the girl already had that power, and shouted that this is what makes her unique. The man calmed down and told Mercia she always lacked self-confidence. Mercia only sighed, a little annoyed. Razel thought years of oppression had taught her to belittle herself. Razel looked gently at Mercia and began explaining how self-doubt breeds more doubt, and Mercia listened attentively to the man in front of her. Razel smiled and said his role as a teacher was to help the girl gain confidence. Mercia smiled and apologized to the man, saying she was counting on him. Looking at Mercia, the man said she would first need to master the technique of self-reinforcement to do this. Mercia smiled and agreed, and Razel thought her mood was good. Razel said the girl should wear the bracelet in that case. He produced a small piece of jewelry. Mercia, confused, asked what it was. The man said it would help her learn to control magic. Mercia put on the bracelet and sighed with admiration. Looking at it, she said he was handsome. Razel said excitedly that this bracelet would definitely let her use the technique, and Mercia replied cheerfully that she would try her best. After a long while, the demon lord's castle lay cloaked in night as a large moon rose over the city. Razel sat at a small table looking at something on the screen directly in front of him. The guy stared at him, sighed, and held out a finger toward him. Suddenly, someone loudly called his name, which surprised the guy a little. Mercia ran up to Razel with a wide smile and told her she had finally managed to use it and was very happy. Mercia stood before the man with a satisfied smile, asked how it looked and urged him to look at her, while Razel sighed in surprise, admitted it was true and said it was amazing. Sometime later, Razel and Mercia went to a new place. They saw a castle-like building. A man wondered what it was doing here. Mercia was surprised to realize someone really lived on the moon. They flew closer to the place. Rise thought the problem was how to get them inside. At that moment they noticed a small entrance and felt curious, so the girl looked at him and said it seemed wide enough for anyone to enter, and Razel was surprised to realize it was no longer a problem. Mercia studied the entrance and frowned at something inside. The girl suggested it could be a trap, but Razel said no, he did not sense any hostility. Razel and Mercy decided to get closer. The man said they would not catch the tiger cub without entering the tiger's lair, so Mercy quickly agreed. When Razel suddenly froze, Mercia's face hit the back of the man in front of her, so she peered around him and asked why he had stopped. The girl looked ahead, surprised to find fresh air and the smell of grass here. At that moment she asked, confused, what it was all about. Ahead of them stretched a wide field with a single large tree at its center, and the girl, shocked, asked what it was. Razel calmly told the girl this was an artificial space. Mercier, sounding confused, said, "A place like that needs enormous magical power and that no one in the world could possess it." The man turned to Mercia and said no, it wasn't human, and at that moment someone appeared behind them and asked what they needed. Mercia and Razel turned around immediately, their faces serious. The girl smiled and said no one had come to greet them, so they went in on their own. The young man said he was too lazy to go outside. Razel studied the young man closely, thinking he was a draconian and clearly very strong. The young man yawned lazily, looked at the guests and asked what their purpose was, repeating his question about what they needed here. Mercy smiled and said she could see the youth was strong and that she wanted to fight him, while Razel watched from the sidelines, smiling, and the draconian looked confused. A short laugh became a louder one. The young man said they did not bother with a surprise attack, and the girl faced them head-on, and he admitted with some shame that he liked such straightforward people and would show them no mercy. The girl took a steadying breath and asked the draconian if he accepted the challenge, while the young man readied himself and gave his consent. He looked at his guests with interest and asked who would go first. Razel and Mercia tensed slightly at the change of scenery. The girl said the young man was very strong, and Razel agreed they had finally found someone truly strong. Mercia asked the young man with a smile if they could attack 2-on-1, and the draconian replied with admiration that he had not had such an opportunity in several thousand years and was thrilled to finally have some fun. Just then, Mercia and Razel took off, and the young man followed suit. The draconian offered his hand and said they could begin. The girl replied that they would not hold back. Razel smiled at her and said it would be fun. Explosions erupted everywhere, signaling the start of a fierce battle. Mercia was surrounded by blasts. Reacting quickly, the young man flew back and avoided the attack, and another explosion rang out where he had been. The draconian was behind the girl in the blink of an eye, looked at her, told her not to yawn, waved his hand, and then delivered a powerful punch. The attack failed. The young man sighed and smiled, then told Razel he seemed to have managed to replace the girl, and that it was pretty good. Razel stood before him with a broken barrier, smiling. At that moment her hand clenched into a fist and became wrapped in dark energy. The young man stared, surprised. The draconian's movements were severely limited. He wondered if this was what the man was trying to achieve. With a fierce smile, the draconian waved his hand and shouted that such a small thing could not constrain his movements. But at that moment he noticed the girl beside him. The young man spun around with a displeased look and cursed for not noticing her approach, unable to pinpoint exactly where Mercia was. An attack struck him from behind, a heavy magical force that left him unable to move. The draconian sighed in pain, certain he would not make it in time. Razel seized the moment and tried to attack the young man, but the young man dodged the blow, sat down to get ready, and then quickly launched a counterattack at Razel. As the draconian's fist hit the man, he spoke his thoughts aloud, smiling as he said, "Razel uses magic in the form of a dragon," and Razel replied that he was only practicing. Scales quickly began to cover the draconian's hand, and he snapped that it was happening again, convinced the man planned to immobilize him completely, and he cursed at Razel, who only sighed with a smile. Mercia stepped out from behind the draconian and kicked him with her foot. Razel noted that dragons lose their heads quickly in battle, which is their weakness. Draconian turned quickly, grinned, and said it would be a kick. A hard blow struck his face, sending him flying with a loud scream, his face covered in blood. Razel looked down at the young man with a smile and said this was not all. He attacked again, piercing him with his hand. A draconian with a large hole in his body started falling from a height. A man and a woman watched as he hit the ground with a loud bang. The draconian lay on the ground with severe wounds, admitting he had lost, then suddenly revealed that Razel and Mercia were from another world, which stunned the man and the woman. Razel approached the dragon and asked if he had really noticed it. The young man said yes, explaining that their clothing makes everything immediately clear, and the draconian added he wanted to teach the man his technique. Rizal was surprised to learn it really belonged to him. The draconian laughed and said he feared his princess of darkness was not agile enough. The girl only nodded, ashamed. Smiling, the draconian asked the man to grant his last wish. Rizal looked at Mercia, who smiled and nodded. Rizal knelt before the young man and agreed, and the young man took the draconian's hand as energy wrapped around them. The man smiled and said everything had worked out. The young man, with the last of his strength, said he was glad to have fought such strong opponents because it had been so much fun. After that, the young man closed his eyes and fell silent with a smile on his face. Mercia asked Rizal whether the young man had died, and Rizal confirmed it. The girl said she still couldn't believe someone could be that strong. Rizal said the young man had spent his whole life honing his skills. Mercia fell silent in annoyance. She felt as though the guy had given her an injection. The Princess of Darkness turned to Rizal and asked him to listen. He asked what had happened. Mercia asked why he had killed the draconian and said the battle's outcome was already decided, so killing him was unnecessary. The girl asked whether that was true, and Rizal hesitated slightly. Mercia wondered whether the draconian was the strongest in this world, and whether it would be better to win him to their side. Rizal abruptly reached out to stop her and said she would understand once she saw the technique the young man had given him, and the girl asked him to clarify what he meant about the technique. She suddenly realized something and told the man to wait a second. Then she demanded to know which technique he had given Rizal. The man just laughed. Rizal said it was called the resurrection of the dead. Mercia exhaled in shock. The girl started swearing loudly at the draconian, calling him a lizard. She ordered Rizal to resurrect the young man, saying she would strangle him again herself. Rizal laughed and told her she was caught.